Luca Müller, 42, a respected architect from Berlin, dedicated to his family and career. He is deeply committed to his work, which often consumes his time, but he prides himself on being a good father and husband. Though quiet and reflective, Luca is sharp and discerning, always noticing the little details. Lately, he's been feeling a growing distance from his wife, but has attributed it to the pressures of their respective careers. Emilia Müller, 38. Originally from Milan, Emilia is a successful project manager at a prestigious tech firm in Munich. She's known for her beauty, sharp intelligence, and the way she effortlessly commands a room. Over the last few years, as her career has soared, her connection with Luca has grown strained. Though she loves her husband, she's found herself drawn to the attention and power of others, particularly her boss. Emilia is a woman at a crossroads, torn between her responsibilities and the thrill of temptation. Alexander Weber, 50. The CEO of the tech firm Emilia works for, Alexander is a powerful, commanding figure in the business world. His reputation for ruthless business tactics is matched only by his charm and charisma. Married 3 times, Alexander is no stranger to scandals. He's accustomed to getting what he wants, and recently, his attentions have been focused on Emilia. Alexander sees himself as invincible, unaware of the consequences that are soon to catch up with him. Luca Müller hadn't always been the type of man to question his wife's loyalty. Their relationship had always been built on mutual respect, deep love, and shared dreams. He and Emilia met in their late 20s, at a design conference in Paris, both enamored with the creativity and ambition the other exuded. Luca, at the time, was an up-and-coming architect, and Emilia, a freshly graduated project manager with dreams of conquering the corporate world. Their love story had been one for the ages, fast, passionate, and seemingly unbreakable. Over the years, Luca had worked tirelessly to build his career, becoming one of the most sought-after architects in Berlin. His dedication meant long hours in the studio, but Emilia had always been supportive, understanding that this was the life they had chosen. As her own career began to flourish in the fast-paced tech industry, their lives became a whirlwind of business meetings, work dinners, and international travel. But with success came distance. Luca began to notice subtle changes in Emilia. The once lively conversations at the dinner table had been replaced by silence. Her phone seemed to buzz more frequently, and she often came home late, citing work emergencies. She looked at him less, spent more time in front of the mirror before heading to work, and their once intimate evenings were now filled with distant good nights. The turning point came when Emilia's boss, Alexander Weber, entered the picture. Emilia had spoken of him in passing before, a brilliant but demanding leader who often pushed his employees to the limit. Weber had a reputation in the industry for being ruthless and unyielding, but he was also charismatic and knew how to charm those around him. Luca didn't think much of it initially, assuming it was simply part of Emilia's demanding job. But as time passed, Alexander's name came up more often. He was the one Emilia was constantly texting. He was the one calling late at night for work advice. And, as Luca discovered, he was the one Emilia had been meeting for after-work drinks. Still, Luca chose to trust his wife, convincing himself that it was nothing more than professional camaraderie. After all, Emilia had always been faithful, hadn't she? The company holiday party. The company's holiday party was held in Munich at one of the city's most luxurious hotels. Emilia had invited Luca weeks in advance, but he was hesitant. He never enjoyed these corporate gatherings, fake smiles, shallow conversations, and the ever-looming feeling that he didn't quite fit into Emilia's world anymore. However, Emilia insisted, almost uncharacteristically eager for him to attend. She had been working tirelessly on an important project for months, and this was her chance to celebrate with her colleagues. "It'll be good for you to meet everyone," she had said with a bright smile. "Plus, I want to show you off. You're my talented architect husband." Her charm worked, and Luca reluctantly agreed. The party was grand, just as he had imagined. Lavish decorations, soft jazz music playing in the background, and the scent of expensive perfume and cologne hanging in the air. As they entered the ballroom, Luca couldn't help but feel slightly out of place among the tech moguls and their glamorous spouses. Emilia, on the other hand, was in her element. She floated through the crowd effortlessly, greeting colleagues and clients with an easy grace. Luca watched her from a distance, admiring how beautiful she looked in her emerald green dress. Luca watched her from a distance, admiring how beautiful she looked in her emerald green dress, her dark hair cascading down her shoulders. But something was off. Her smiles seemed a little too forced, her laughter too exaggerated. There was a tension in the air that Luca couldn't quite put his finger on. As the night wore on, Luca began to notice Emilia's interactions with Alexander Weber. At first, it was subtle. A lingering glance here, a soft laugh there. But as the champagne flowed, their proximity grew. Alexander's hand would find its way to Emilia's back as they talked, their heads bending close together in whispered conversations. Luca's stomach tightened. He tried to convince himself that it was all innocent. Emilia was simply being friendly with her boss, wasn't she? He excused himself to the bar, ordering a stiff drink to calm his nerves. But the unease gnawed at him, a growing suspicion that he couldn't shake. It was then that he overheard snippets of a conversation between two of Emilia's colleagues. "I mean, it's obvious, right?" one woman whispered to the other. "Everyone knows what's going on between Emilia and Weber. They've been spending so much time together lately. It's practically written all over her face." Luca's heart dropped, his hands clenched around his glass, the room suddenly feeling suffocating. Could it be true? Could Emilia really be involved with her boss? He had to know. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, Luca decided to follow his instincts. He had noticed Emilia and Alexander slipping away from the main ballroom earlier, heading toward the terrace. The terrace was secluded, with a stunning view of the snow-covered city below. It was a romantic spot, one that Luca had visited with Emilia many times before on their trips to Munich. His heart pounded in his chest as he approached the terrace doors, each step feeling heavier than the last. He could hear faint voices, the sound of laughter, and then silence. Pushing the door open slightly, Luca peeked out, his worst fears coming to life before his eyes. There, under the soft glow of the string lights, was Emilia. Her back was turned to him, but he recognized her immediately. The way her dress shimmered in the moonlight, the way her hair fell in soft waves. And standing in front of her, with his hand resting on her waist, was Alexander Weber. Luca's breath caught in his throat as he watched them, unable to move. They were too close, far too close for it to be just a friendly conversation. Emilia's face was flushed, her eyes locked onto Alexander's. And then, before Luca could process what was happening, she leaned in. The kiss was soft, brief, but it was enough. Enough to shatter everything Luca had believed in. His world crumbled around him as he watched his wife, the woman he had loved and trusted for so many years, share an intimate moment with another man. Time seemed to stand still. Luca felt numb, his mind racing, as he struggled to comprehend the betrayal unfolding before him. He had to leave, had to get away before he lost control. Without making a sound, he turned and walked back into the ballroom, his heart heavy with the weight of what he had just witnessed. Luca spent the next few days in a haze, unable to confront Emilia. He needed time to think, to process what he had seen. Emilia, oblivious to his discovery, continued on as if nothing had changed. She was cheerful, affectionate even, as if trying to make up for the distance that had grown between them over the past few months. But Luca couldn't bring himself to meet her gaze. One evening, as they sat at the dinner table in their Berlin apartment, Luca finally broke his silence. "I saw you," he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. Emilia froze, her fork hovering in midair. "What do you mean?" she asked, her tone cautious. "At the party," Luca continued, his eyes fixed on his plate. "With Alexander, I saw everything. The color drained from Amelia's face as the weight of his words sank in. She set her fork down slowly, her hands trembling. Luca, don't, he interrupted, his voice firmer now. Don't lie to me, Amelia. I know what I saw. Tears welled up in Amelia's eyes as she looked at him, her guilt finally catching up to her. I'm so sorry, she whispered, her voice cracking. It was a mistake. I never meant for this to happen. Luca's heart ached as he listened to her, the pain of her betrayal cutting deep. Why? He asked, his voice barely audible. Why him? Why now? Amelia wiped away her tears, struggling to find the words. I don't know, she admitted, her voice filled with regret. I was lonely. You've been so busy with work, and She trailed off, unable to finish. Luca looked at her, his eyes filled with sorrow. I was busy because I thought we were building a life together, he said softly. I thought we were a team. Amelia broke down, sobbing uncontrollably. I'm so sorry, Luca. I never wanted to. Eventually, Luca made the difficult decision to leave. It wasn't easy. There were tears, apologies, and moments of hope. But in the end, he knew that their relationship would never be the same. They parted ways amicably, both knowing that their love had been irreparably damaged. As Luca packed his bags and walked out of their shared apartment for the last time, he felt a sense of closure. He had loved Amelia deeply, but sometimes love wasn't enough. The betrayal had left a scar that would take time to heal. But Luca knew that he would eventually find peace. Looking out at the snowy streets of Berlin, Luca took a deep breath and walked forward, ready to start a new chapter in his life. Thank you for watching. If you have any thoughts, questions, or comments about this story, feel free to leave them below. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more compelling tales.
On a late Friday evening in my office, I was assessing a few candidates who had heard about an upcoming vacancy in our office staff. I served as the regional head of a chemical company supplying products for control, fertilizer, and water containment for soil. Our company relied heavily on farmers who cultivated or supplied our food. Being environmentally conscious, we proudly boasted our products as completely eco-friendly, a pioneering move in our industry. 2 of my office staff's spouses had been promoted, prompting them to tender their resignations. Both would be relocating within the next 3 months, sparking a rush to fill their positions swiftly. Our sales team operated across 8 states in the heart of the nation. Surpassing our sales projections this year was a significant achievement. Kathy, my executive assistant, popped her head into my office to inform me, Ed, all 8 candidates have confirmed their interview appointments for Monday. I'm off for the night. Every Thursday, I traveled to one of the states under my jurisdiction to conduct a half-day sales meeting on Fridays before returning home. Consequently, Thursday nights had become my wife's designated evening to socialize with her friends, albeit incurring considerable babysitting expenses over the years. My weekly excursions provided crucial face-to-face support for our sales representatives, fostering their job performance and problem-solving skills. This investment had yielded substantial returns over the years, with not a single resignation in 8 years, an accomplishment for our company. Today, I had just made it back in time to wrap up a few tasks before heading home. The company had persistently urged me to relinquish this aspect of my role, but I found the solitude during these trips invaluable for contemplation. With a wife who knew everything and 3 children, these moments of quiet reflection during drives were invaluable, besides sparing the branch the expense of hiring a sales manager. Maintaining a record of staying under budget was a priority for me. With our children in junior and senior high school, our eldest, a source of immense pride, set to graduate and attend Southeast Missouri University in the fall, our family was in a favorable position. Her full scholarship, awarded by my employer, was a significant boon. Our youngest daughter, just 16, was busy preparing for her learner's permit. Grace, my wife of 20 years, served as the executive assistant to the district attorney since our youngest's birth. The district attorney had recently been offered a lucrative position with the federal government, which he promptly accepted. Known for his no-nonsense approach, it was a no-brainer, given the substantial increase in salary. Despite being roughly the same age as me, he had never married. Contrary to rumors, I doubted he was gay. For the past 15 years, my parents had graciously taken our 3 children every second weekend of the month, affording my wife and me some much-needed quality time together. This gesture came at a pivotal moment in our marriage, allowing us to rediscover ourselves and ultimately strengthening our bond. Without their support, we might have added to the divorce statistics. They had approximately 3 months left before this chapter would close, as my eldest, Amy, was set to intern in our senator's office in Washington over the summer before embarking on her political science studies at the university. A while back, my dad, on a whim, purchased Ancestry.com kits for each of our 3 children, with my consent, and submitted them as a jest. Following their guidelines, we understood that a match would only occur if a relative had also submitted their DNA. My children discussed it with me, and I granted permission, acknowledging that we all have distant relatives we might not know about. Perhaps it would lead us on a new journey. Amy suggested keeping it a surprise for her mother until we received the results, aware it could take 5 or 6 months. This weekend we were traveling to Nashville to attend the Grand Ole Opry and would return home on Sunday. It was my wife who organized this special trip, aiming to create another cherished memory in our journey together. Update. During my final year at university, I crossed paths with my wife, Grace, at a football game. Contrary to being a player on the field, I was one of those anonymous vendors peddling overpriced snacks to the crowd. Grace, being one of the daughters of the team's medical staff, always had complimentary tickets at her disposal. An altercation ensued between her and her date over a trivial matter, resulting in a shove that inadvertently involved me. As she pushed him away, he collided with me, sending me tumbling down the concrete stairs with my food tray in tow. I regained consciousness in the hospital, my head swathed in bandages, the doctor informing me of 25 stitches due to a split forehead. Grace visited me daily, burdened with guilt, and met my entire family during my recovery from a week-long coma caused by internal injuries. As the haze lifted from my sight, I perceived an unfamiliar goddess-like figure before me, initially mistaking her for a celestial being guiding me to the afterlife. Yet the reality of my girlfriend, Esmeralda, standing by her side brought clarity, albeit disappointment, to her reaction. Hoping it was all a dream, I drifted back into sleep, yearning for Esmeralda's absence upon awakening, a wish that materialized when I opened my eyes to find her gone, replaced by Grace, who steadfastly supported me as I pieced my life back together. Though I never formally asked her, our relationship naturally evolved, culminating in marriage 3 months later as Grace walked down the aisle, captivating with her 5'8" stature, long blonde locks, deep blue-black eyes, and an enviable figure. By our 5th year together, we found ourselves at a crossroads, contemplating separation without fully comprehending the reasons behind our drift. Despite my confusion, Grace and I remained committed, eventually resolving to overcome whatever obstacles lay ahead. We had just departed from Lambert's on our way home, a restaurant coasting on its reputation. Their claim to fame was tossing large buns across the room for customers to catch, overshadowing the otherwise lackluster, overcooked food. We made the stop at this tourist trap because it evoked memories of my wife's mother's cooking. Need I say more? Grace initiated a conversation with me, expressing her thoughts on the concept of infidelity within our marriage. She suggested that I should explore the idea of having an affair, indicating that she would approve of it. Grace reasoned that societal norms regarding marriage vows had changed and that I should reconsider my stance. She believed that such an experience might enrich our relationship and deepen our understanding of each other. Her perspective troubled me, suggesting a willingness to exploit others for personal gratification, a stance I couldn't accept. It revealed a side of her I hadn't seen before, reshaping my perceptions considerably. "Let me ask you this, my dear wife," I countered. "Why is it so important to you that I have your blessing for an affair?" Have I done something so repulsive that you're seeking a reason to end our marriage? 5 minutes of silence ensued before I resumed the music, her lack of response speaking volumes. Grace was always quick with an answer, but now she was silent, leaving me to ponder why. I couldn't shake the feeling that my wife's sudden approval of an affair was significant, though its motive remained elusive. Regardless, I was convinced something was amiss in our lives and resolved to uncover it. Driving for an hour, we were about 40 miles from home when Grace again silenced the sound. I switched on the recorder once more. "I apologize, Ed," she said. "I suppose I've been indulging in too many Harlequin romance stories. Those notions must have come from out of nowhere." Having said that, she resumed the sound system, assuming the matter was settled. However, the dilemma arose from the fact that both our children and I knew she despised those books, as they had been her mother's favorite. Throughout her life, she had dismissed them as lowbrow and beneath her. Whenever her mother passed the latest editions to her, Grace would promptly discard them. During the last leg of our drive, I realized the only aspect of her life I knew little about was her Thursday night outings with her friends. It hadn't seemed significant or concerning enough to inquire about. On the rare occasions when I was home, she willingly altered her plans to spend the evening with me. Until today, I had no reason to doubt those nights, as I had complete trust in her. However, following our recent conversation, I found myself questioning the nature of her girls' night out. Was she frequenting bars with her friends, engaging in questionable activities like one-night stands? By the time we arrived home, I resolved to uncover the truth about her Thursday night outings. After settling in at home, I spent some time with my parents, enjoying their company and hearing about their weekend activities. They mentioned wanting to have a private chat with me the following day, expressing concern about my wife and her youngest daughter, but didn't elaborate further. We agreed to meet around 3 o'clock when I would be available after my job interviews. Later, when saying goodbye, I assured them I'd address their concerns after work. Once they left, I informed my wife about the plan to visit my parents the next day to fix something, ensuring she was aware of the potential delay for dinner. She acknowledged it, assuring me it was fine to eat later. My dad and mom arrived promptly, and we ushered them into my office. After settling in, we waited for one of the staff to bring us coffee. Once served, Kathy closed the door as she left. "Ed," my dad began, "I deeply regret sending in our grandchildren's DNA. They found a match for April. She has a grandmother on her father's side searching for her son and his descendants." With that, he produced the form from Ancestry.com, displaying a lady's name and phone number. I was devastated, and my father could see the impact the news had on me. "Dad, I don't believe it's a mistake. Let's see what we can find out together," I said. Using the office phone, I dialed the number and activated both the recording and speaker functions to ensure a permanent record of the conversation. After 2 rings, someone answered. "I'm Edward Paul Adams, seeking Mrs. Beatrice Smith regarding a DNA match from Ancestry.com, I explained. "May I speak with her?" "You're speaking with her, young man," came the reply. "What can I do for you?" "It's complicated," I replied. "Long story short, I've just learned that my youngest daughter is your granddaughter." "Are you referring to April Marie Adams?" she asked. "Yes," I confirmed. "Then perhaps you know my son, whom I had to give up for adoption at 15, Mrs. Smith continued. "I might if I knew his name," I responded. "He was adopted by a family named Barrow. His given names were Luke Robert," Mrs. Smith revealed. My heart sank. My parents and I recognized the name all too well. Her candid admission had turned into a nightmare for me. "He's alive and well," I disclosed. "Currently, he serves as the district attorney here in Cape Girardeau County, Missouri. He's also my wife's boss. And now, I think I understand why he never married." "He's my only child," Mrs. Smith confessed. "I'm battling stage 4 lung cancer and don't have much time left. Would you allow April to visit me before I pass away? If needed, I'll cover the expenses. I want to meet her and pass on my estate to her." "Given the circumstances, I'll let you coordinate with my parents. They'll arrange for her to visit this weekend," I agreed. "But I can't let her travel alone. Is there anything else you need?" "Please provide a notary statement for my lawyer to conduct a DNA test," Mrs. Smith requested. "He'll want to verify her identity before changing my will, given the value of her inheritance." "No problem. I'll hand over the call to my dad and he'll handle the details," I assured her. Exiting my office, I handed Kathy my personal recorder, instructing her to transcribe and notarize both my conversation and the phone call. "This is necessary for the divorce proceedings," I added. "Do you want the authorization for the DNA test drawn up too?" Kathy inquired, demonstrating her keen awareness of the situation. "Yes, please, but keep it quiet for a few weeks. I want to investigate my soon-to-be ex-wife's Thursday night activities," I replied. Turning to my assistant, David, I requested his and his wife's cooperation for a personal matter, signaling the seriousness of the situation. "Shorty should be finishing her dispatch soon. I'll text her to come over right away," David responded, recognizing the gravity of the situation. I returned to my office and we reached an agreement. Using the spare key they had for my house, they planned to pack some clothes for April and leave next Friday. I'd have her pulled out of school and drop her off at their place by 10 o'clock. As I saw my parents off, David's wife entered. I directed her to his office, where I'd join them shortly. Thanks to modern communication methods, Kathy had already made copies and transcribed the documents. I handed David and Cheryl a copy, suggesting they start with my conversation with my wife. I gave Kathy the paperwork my dad had provided to make copies for my lawyer's files, instructing her to find the best. Cheryl and David, longtime acquaintances, were deeply affected by recent revelations concerning my wife and me. Cheryl, particularly, had a close relationship with Grace, having grown up as neighbors. The discovery of the truth had left them both shocked. We discussed potential actions to uncover more information. I suggested a plan involving David using my company car for sales trips, while Cheryl would use David's car with the pretext of cross-training for the next 3 months. Meanwhile, I planned to follow my wife on Thursday nights to gather evidence discreetly. My suspicion grew as I recounted recent events, particularly Grace's suggestion for me to have an affair. I speculated that she might be planning to move with Luke Robert Barrow, which could lead to justifying a divorce in her eyes if she could prove my infidelity. Cheryl expressed her agreement and suggested involving the police to gather more detailed information about their activities. She even mentioned a contact who could help arrange it. Later, Kathy informed us about Dale Allen Britton's departure from the district attorney's office and his new practice. Cheryl asked me to convey her regards to Dale when I visited him. In summary, we devised a plan to uncover more information and sought legal counsel to handle the situation. I left to meet Dale, a man involved in the women's right to life movement, challenging Roe v. Wade in the Supreme Court. His unconventional approach to the law was shaking up everything he touched. Things started to make sense. My marital issues with Grace coincided with her employment under Luke Barrow, around the time I was promoted to sales manager, requiring frequent overnight sales meetings. If they were indeed having an affair every Thursday night, I had unknowingly been deceived for over 15 years. The expensive gifts from Luke to Grace now seemed suspicious. Dale was ready for me when I arrived. Cheryl had briefed him on our plans. He provided me with access to Luke Barrow's house and the alarm code. Handing me a phone number, he said it would connect me with helpful services at a reasonable price. Having grown up on the streets, Dale still had connections to get things done. The access codes he provided would remain valid until the end of the week, after which Luke would be reminded to change them. Dale planned to sue Barrow for child support from April's birth, potentially bankrupting him under state law. He also suggested temporarily transferring my parental authority to my parents until the court case concluded, to prevent accusations of manipulation. I offered to pay him up front, but he declined, fearing Grace would detect it. Instead, he requested a check, to be cashed after the legal proceedings commenced. His strategic thinking assured me that he had my best interests at heart. I left with the impression that Dale had his own motives for targeting Luke Barrow. Both Grace and Luke were in for a rude awakening. Dale Britton had devised his own strategy for the divorce proceedings. Update. I completed all necessary paperwork, granting my parents parental rights over April starting Friday, and provided them with a copy. After Dale and I briefed them on the situation, they agreed it was the right move. I waited for Cheryl to arrive in her 2002 Ford Taurus as David was away on his first sales trip. Cheryl would leave her car with me and take David's home. My eldest informed me that their mother wouldn't be home for dinner, joining her friends straight from work. Once Cheryl arrived, we swapped cars, and I packed my suitcase in the trunk. "Ed," Cheryl said, Dispatch and the guys are ready. Just tell me where to go. Thanks, I replied. Dale wants me to call him if we proceed so he can serve them personally. I'm curious about Dale's vendetta against Luke Barrow. Dale's all about principles, Cheryl explained. Luke's known for not sticking to his word. It was intriguing to observe Grace and Luke depart in separate cars, meeting later at Charlie's Bar and Grill for dinner. Afterward, they went their separate ways. I positioned myself near Luke Barrow's residence, with Dale's associates, now my team, fully prepared. I had a clear view of Luke's house from a safe location. Grace arrived first, disabling the alarm with a code and unlocking the door. We recorded her entering. Moments later, Luke pulled in and Grace greeted him at the door. Her blouse was open, braless, revealing her cleavage. Luke embraced her, kissing passionately. As they entered, I ceased filming. 6 rooms in Luke's house were wired for audio and video, courtesy of his neighbor's son serving time. Everything inside was streamed live on their Facebook pages. They were monitoring my car, expecting me to seek a new romantic interest. Anticipating this, they had hired a courtesan who matched my preferences. I alerted Cheryl, who informed David. As an ex-Marine, he skillfully veered off-road safely at 10 p.m., then called for assistance. Cheryl notified me, and I confirmed the green light, providing the address. While awaiting developments, I tampered with the valves in their car tires, ensuring they couldn't escape the predicament they were about to face. The adulterous pair wouldn't be going anywhere anytime soon. The police officers arrived, sirens blaring, and banged on the door, seeking Grace Adams. Luke Barrows initially denied her presence until the cops pointed out her car in the driveway. Grace eventually appeared, clad only in a bedsheet. Mrs. Grace Adams, your husband Edward Paul's car was in a motor vehicle accident near Little Rock, Arkansas. We were directed to check here by your parents when we couldn't locate you, the officer stated, intentionally misleading her. Grace's face paled at the news. As the police departed, I followed closely behind. Every moment from their arrival to departure was recorded and streamed live on Facebook, providing irrefutable evidence of the ongoing affair to the citizens of Cape. At midnight, my daughter Amy called in distress, reporting that her mother hadn't returned home and wasn't answering calls. I advised her to contact Luke Barrow and insisted he put Grace on the phone. Why him? Amy questioned. He's been her Thursday night companion for over 16 years, I revealed. After sending Amy a clip of Grace and Luke's encounter with the police, she soon discovered her mother's deception. Upon Amy's revelation, I instructed her to open the front door, preparing to confront Grace. As I retrieved my suitcase from the car, Dale Allen Britton called, informing me he had served restraining orders against Grace and Luke, prohibiting them from coming near us. Amy, open the garage so I can park Cheryl's car inside, I instructed, pretending to be on my way to Little Rock. We complied with the plan. Amy questioned the recent locksmith visit, to which I confirmed it was part of our preparations, prompted by the DNA test my father submitted to Ancestry.com, revealing a match for April, and uncovering Grace's connection to her boss, who turned out to be the son she gave up for adoption at 15. Amy, my daughter, became emotional. I embraced her tightly until she regained composure. Then we dimmed the lights and retreated to the kitchen for a private conversation. I activated my voice recorder and played the discussion between her mother and me during our return journey from Nashville. It provided Amy with insight into her mother's words firsthand. "Why would Mom encourage you to have an affair, Dad?" Amy inquired. "To mitigate the consequences of her own actions if they were ever exposed," I replied. Ironically, her suggestion led to the truth emerging. A soft knock interrupted us. Since I wasn't expected to be home, Amy answered the door. It was a police officer who informed us that they had intercepted a taxi carrying Grace. They warned her of violating a court order if she proceeded further. Throughout the night, my eldest daughter and I discussed Grace's actions. We both agreed that given her talent for storytelling during her girls' night out, she should have pursued a career in writing. Amy expressed disbelief at the revelation that her mother had been having an affair with the same man for over 16 years. She wondered why they hadn't noticed sooner. I explained that it was easy to overlook because the kids were young, and I frequently traveled for work, trusting in our relationship and seeing no reason to question Grace's activities. Amy reflected on how their trust in Grace had blinded them to the truth. Realizing the extent of Grace's manipulation, I was stunned. Amy pointed out that the most painful aspect was how Grace had exploited their trust to maintain her affair. As Amy went to make coffee, I noticed the dawn approaching and received a text from Grace, urgently requesting to talk about a family issue concerning our oldest child before my return from the trip. Deciding how to respond, I reassured Amy and replied to Grace's message, declining her manipulation and informing her that she could continue her plans with Luke Barrow, but without the kids. I explained that Grace had wanted me to start an affair to use against me in divorce court and never expected to be caught after so many years. It must have been painful for Amy to hear the truth. Many struggle to accept harsh realities. Eventually, they will come to terms with it. I embraced my daughter as she shed tears once more. We had just calmed her down when Eric and April woke up. I turned on the kitchen TV to watch the morning news. Soon they joined us for breakfast, surprised to see me at home. We were all taken aback when my wife's image appeared on the screen. My son raised the volume out of curiosity. My heart went out to my kids as they heard Grace and Luke disparaging me, calling me foolish and clueless. Their mother then made a sarcastic comment about me, which caused both of them to burst into laughter. The reporter interjected, suggesting that they weren't laughing anymore after the scheme they had orchestrated to set up Edward Adams with a professional escort had backfired. The scene shifted to Dale serving them both with lawsuits, with the news reporter elaborating on the details. Alice ran to me, sobbing, and sat on my lap, discovering in a harsh way that her biological father wasn't her father, but her mother's long-term lover. Eric summed it up aptly, questioning what their mother's view of their father meant for the rest of them. Once April had composed herself, Amy and I explained what had occurred since their mother and I returned from Nashville. I arranged for them to be excused from school on Friday and Monday to process their emotions. Just as we were about to start breakfast, April exclaimed that the police chief was on the line. That caught our attention, so we turned up the volume. It was publicly announced that both Grace Adams and Luke Barrow, our current district attorney, were under criminal investigation. A special team from across the county was assembled to lead the inquiry. I thought to myself that when one's private actions become public, society cannot overlook them. Hypocrisy reigns in our society every day. After breakfast and tidying up, I had my 3 children sit down at the table. I showed each of them a copy of the letter my dad had received. Then I said, "April, my parents are picking you up to take you to meet your biological dad's mother. She's terminally ill and has requested to see you. There's a significant reason behind it, but I think it's best for the lady you're meeting to explain it to you. As far as I'm concerned, you are my daughter and always will be. If you have any questions, ask your grandparents." "Amy, can you assist your sister in packing for the weekend while I call my parents?" I asked. Once the girls left, my son asked, "How are you handling this, Dad?" "I'm struggling," I admitted. "I'm constantly fighting to keep myself composed. Remember, son, if this ever happens to you as a father, you have to stay strong for everyone else in your life." With that said, I called my parents and explained my whereabouts. They said they would come over as soon as they finished packing their car. They still had an hour before their flight. It was in that moment that my sons and my relationship changed forever, for the better. The 3 of us watched the daughter I had raised leave with my parents to meet her biological grandmother for the first time. I prayed fervently that it would go well and that she would return feeling the same about me. The atmosphere at the local district attorney's office resembled a morgue. Grace Adams had gone out to buy new clothes after having her car towed and the 4 tires' stems replaced. Meanwhile, Luke Barrow was reviewing the lawsuit against him. Although they lacked a direct DNA sample, the biological link was undeniable, leaving him unable to deny parentage. The truth about their relationship and long-term affair had become known to everyone on staff. This, along with concealing April Adams's true parentage, was turning into a political nightmare. Fraud under the law had evolved to encompass the failure to disclose all pertinent facts, leading Dale to sue both Grace and Luke jointly in a civil suit. It increasingly appeared that they had been deceiving Grace's husband, Ed, for years. While many lawyers affirmed Ed Adams and Dale Britton's likely success, those contacted so far were unwilling to get involved, likely due to Dale's formidable reputation in court. The Facebook exposure of their conduct and their admission of attempting to ruin an honest man to benefit themselves was headline news, given Ed's societal position. Grace, having frequented a familiar clothing store for years, never anticipated being confronted by a woman accusing her of insanity, claiming she should have foreseen the consequences. This revelation came when the lady accused her of appearing in compromising photos on Facebook for hours. Upon returning to Luke's house, Grace found a company finishing a service call, assuming she was the homeowner and suggesting resetting the security codes. Only later did she realize the lack of electronic signature verification. Calling Luke, Grace questioned who was trying to sabotage his new position in St. Louis, prompting her to reveal her discoveries. They both suspected deeper motives beyond Ed protecting himself, given the political nature of his new job. After making coffee, Grace reviewed the divorce petition. It stung to realize that her own words had aroused her husband's suspicions, especially her requests for him to deliberately damage others. Furthermore, the revelation from Mom and Dad Adams about the Ancestry.com DNA match exposed April's true parentage, offering undeniable proof of her affair and potentially jeopardizing their marriage before April's birth. At that moment, she realized Ed needed to know if the affair was ongoing. He had orchestrated the events of the previous night, revealing hidden truths about her life. Just as she took another sip of coffee, the doorbell rang. Rising, she answered it to find the neighbor Luke disliked. "Mr. Primrose," she greeted, "what can I do for you?" Handing her a legal envelope, he explained, "Ed used my place as a base for his operations against you and your long-term lover last night. I permitted it gladly as Luke Barrow had my son sentenced to the maximum. The information in this envelope shared with you last night will also be delivered to everyone on your side of the family this afternoon. Ed asked if you're still laughing at him." Watching him walk away with a broad smile, Grace returned to the kitchen and opened the envelope, filled with incriminating pictures. They depicted her entering Luke's house with her key, greeting him at the door, engaging in lovemaking activities, and being confronted by police officers. Ed's team was efficient, making it seem like he collaborated with police officers seeking retribution against Luke. The final signed page by her husband revealed the potential for significant public fallout, jeopardizing her plans to assert control over him. Now, the priority was damage control to mitigate the fallout from Ed's public disclosure. Grace. By last Sunday evening, upon returning home from Nashville, it became apparent to me that you were scheming to orchestrate our divorce. Since then, I've been trying to discern what led your affection for me to transform into pure animosity. Now I understand the reason behind it. I realize you hold me responsible for what you perceive as deficiencies in your life during the period when we only had our 2 children. It seems you felt confined in our marriage and yearned for the carefree days of being single again. Otherwise, you wouldn't have willingly sought solace in another man to relive the single life. By doing so, you allowed him to temporarily whisk you away from what you despised a few hours each week. I recognize that the sole reason you remained in a marriage with a man you despised and saw as lifeless was because Luke didn't want the burden of raising kids, not even his own. With your perception of me, there was no way you'd leave the children alone with someone you considered worthless. Your pride wouldn't allow it, leading you to endure a lifetime of deliberate falsehoods. Every day you both evaded consequences, your disdain for me grew. I became increasingly foolish and incompetent in your eyes. How much laughter did you and Luke share at the expense of the oblivious betrayed man? Did you boost his affection for you by belittling or mocking me? What I can't forgive or forget is the message you and the one you regard as your true husband have conveyed to our children, as it will shape their lives indefinitely. I've yet to comprehend the extent of amusement Luke and you derived from manipulating me and our children's lives as if we were mere pawns on a chessboard. The KVOS 12 news reporter aptly captured this when questioning whether you still found amusement in Edward Adams, husband of Grace Adams. I observed Amy, Eric, and April witnessing as you and your lover publicly disclosed your intentions towards me through the media. It was heartbreaking to witness our children as you casually joked about how effortless it would be to bring down the foolish idiot. Our son Eric remarked, "If Mom sees you as nothing but trash to be discarded, what does she really think of us?" I haven't broached the topic of your future relationship with them yet. Currently, it's fair to say it's non-existent due to your and Luke's profound disgust and contempt towards me. At least we're both aware that you derive joy from leaving me branded as a clueless fool for life. Perhaps tonight you and Luke can celebrate your victory with a toast. Ed, update. Grace's hands began to tremble so violently that she dropped the paper. She appeared spiteful, bitter, and cruel, showing no concern for her children, husband, or anyone else. It was evident that she cared only about herself and satisfying her carnal desires. Her sobs shattered the room's silence. Ed had a knack for undermining one's credibility without direct condemnation. His observations about their conduct left no room for dispute among readers. In his view, every action she took was to sustain her lifestyle, not out of love. He likely realized that Luke was urging her to leave him and the children before April's conception. Luke's new job forced them to accelerate their plans, originally set for after April's high school graduation. While she wasn't laughing anymore, Ed effectively pointed out that their actions validated his words. Ed believed their disdain for him prompted their attempt to destroy him. Without explicitly stating it, it was a declaration of war. If he went down, he'd take them down with him. Grace resumed reading the divorce petition, finding it utterly devastating. One of the suits accused them of fraud for concealing April's true parentage. The damages sought in the fraud case made her feel sick. If Ed won, both she and Luke would face financial ruin. Ed and his lawyer were proving that they could no longer underestimate him as the fool they believed him to be. Update. Saturday was chaotic for my two eldest children and me. From early morning until around 4 in the afternoon, we had family members dropping by. Grace's parents, her 2 brothers, 1 sister, and their spouses came to offer their support, each bringing one of their favorite dishes to ensure we had something to eat. Even my brother and sister visited from out of town to check up on me. The 3 of us were enveloped in love and support. Each visitor found it difficult to grasp how they could have been deceived by Grace for so long. They all agreed that what had surfaced on social media proved she was trying to destroy me out of hatred. My father-in-law and I went onto the back deck for a moment, where he suggested I let go of whatever was bothering me. He assured me that Cora would keep others away until I felt better and stayed with me until I calmed down. He mentioned plans to revise his will, intending to divide Grace's share among my 3 children. He expressed his disappointment in Grace's actions, stating that he could never forgive her for what she had become. Later, my father called to inform me that April had met the lady and that their meeting went well. Mrs. Smith seemed interested in our family's situation and helped April open up about her feelings. The lawyer obtained the necessary blood sample and had a private chat with my father. They discussed Luke Barrow, and my father shared what we knew about him. It was revealed that Luke's real father was serving a life sentence for a serious crime, and April's arrival had a significant impact on his inheritance. I assured my father that Dale Britton had taken legal measures to keep Luke away from us. Our day had been busy with family members from both sides offering support. My parents were staying as guests at Mrs. Smith's estate, where April was currently with her. They liked Mrs. Smith, and her lawyer mentioned that seeing April had brought a smile to her face after a long time. My mom then spoke to me, mentioning a conversation she had with Mrs. Smith about me and expressing gratitude for how we handled the situation. Mrs. Smith planned to leave everything in a trust for April to be managed by me until she turned 25. Before ending the call, I requested that my parents text me when they were leaving so I could be there when they brought April home. I messaged April, letting her know that we all miss her and sending our love, Dad. Finally, we found time to clean up before David and Cheryl arrived with my car. I apologized to Cheryl for forgetting to return it. Cheryl mentioned that the police chief saw an opportunity to bring down Luke Barrow and that he and Dale were collaborating. Dale had provided some questionable items for the investigators to examine. David shared that the atmosphere at the office was heavy, and everyone was upset upon his return. He informed them generally that some of them had been aware of the situation for most of the week and were offering assistance where possible. I commented that it had been an emotional roller coaster since Thursday night and that the kids were still struggling at times, so I planned to take Monday off too. Cheryl inquired if I had heard from Grace, to which I responded that I hadn't since Thursday night. I speculated that Luke and she were probably busy moving on with their lives as they had publicly made it clear how they saw us. Early Sunday morning, my youngest daughter called to ask if it was okay for her and her grandparents to return home late on Monday. I agreed, pending her grandparents' approval. She thanked me for insisting she go and explained that Mrs. Smith had helped her accept that it wasn't her fault because her mother's affair had brought her into the world. She expressed her love for me before hanging up. Amy, Eric, and I observed as my parents arrived in our driveway on Monday evening. They appeared stressed and weary. As soon as my mom stepped out of the car, she rushed into my arms. I must admit, it felt comforting to have my youngest daughter back home. Dad opened the trunk and brought in her suitcase, which Eric promptly took up to her bedroom. The three of them then gathered in the family room so April could share about her new grandmother, allowing my parents and me a chance to catch up. We retreated to the kitchen where I brewed a fresh pot of coffee while my parents shared their impressions of Mrs. Beatrice Smith. "She seemed at peace when we left," Dad remarked. "It was as if she had come to terms with her impending pass-away. Meeting April and seeing her acceptance meant a lot to her." Mom pulled out a legal-size envelope from her purse and handed it to me, explaining, "This was given to me by her lawyer, per Beatrice's instructions." I opened it and found a letter, along with a check for $50,000. The letter was brief and straightforward. The grand lady thanked me for fulfilling her request, mentioning that she had already surpassed her expected lifespan before our contact. DNA had confirmed the biological connection, and she commended me for raising April well. She urged me to use the funds to navigate through the challenging times we were facing and to stay true to my values. I allowed my parents to read it, and we pondered the possibility that we had fulfilled someone's dying wish. Over coffee, I briefed them on everything that had occurred during their absence. I expressed my belief that the worst of the emotional turmoil for our family was behind us, and we could return to our normal routine starting the next day. The remainder of the week proceeded relatively smoothly, all things considered. Grace attempted to reach out to each of our children by phone, but was met with rejection. Meanwhile, the corporate headquarters was pleased that I was no longer managing the sales meetings and began the search for a new sales manager for the first time in a decade. As I sat in my office reviewing monthly sales figures, Kathy entered, expressing concern about trouble brewing. I inquired about the issue, and she informed me that my recent letter to Grace had been posted online on the Southeastern Missouri newspaper's website. We quickly accessed the website's Speak Out section and found the letter. Kathy read it aloud, and I acknowledged that I had written it in a moment of emotional distress, wondering if I had been too harsh. Kathy disagreed, stating that the letter simply stated the reality of Grace's long-term behavior in a direct manner. She pointed out that either of them could have ended the affair and come clean, but Luke had enjoyed the benefits without bearing the costs. We discussed how rare it was for society to witness the consequences of someone's actions on a family in such a public manner. Kathy remarked that, as someone who had experienced divorce, it served as a stark reminder of the pain and suffering endured before finding solace. I then mentioned a comment on the website from a longtime feminist, highlighting how Grace and Luke's actions had tarnished the movement for equality and empowerment. Later, Grace and Luke sat at Charlie's Bar and Grill for dinner. Despite it typically being bustling on Friday nights, the place was unusually empty, with vacant tables surrounding them. When they inquired with the waitress, she explained that people were waiting but refused to be seen sitting near them in public, likely because they had read my recent letter to Grace on the newspaper's website. They swiftly requested the bill and departed, realizing they needed to lay low in public for the foreseeable future. Both were grappling with the reality that their actions had significantly restricted their social circle. As they exited, Grace spotted her parents seated at a nearby table, waiting for their order. She approached them, with Luke trailing behind. Upon hearing her voice, her father addressed them coldly. "Mr. Barrow, I suggest you remove your mistress from here and allow my wife and me to enjoy our meal in peace." Grace left the restaurant in tears, finally comprehending that there was no turning back once you crossed a certain line. She realized she would live with the consequences of her and Luke's actions for the rest of her life. Returning to Luke's place, they visited the website and saw firsthand the public's overwhelming disdain for both of them. Update. I sat in the passenger seat of my car observing April drive. We departed this morning for Wichita, Kansas upon learning of her grandmother Beatrice's passing. Heading to the airport to catch the private plane provided by the estate, April was deeply affected, having grown close to her grandmother through their frequent phone calls. Amy and Eric had been a tremendous help, bringing the four of us closer together. They were both urging me to start dating again, but I've been hesitant. Once bitten, twice shy. Meanwhile, Luke and Grace had relocated to St. Louis. Luke was allowed to start his job early by the feds, with the county eager to rid itself of him once he repaid over $45,000 in questionable expenses. They now resided in a two-bedroom rented apartment, preparing for the possibility of bankruptcy due to an impending civil lawsuit. According to Missouri bankruptcy laws, they could retain only $10,000 each in equity. Our divorce had been finalized according to state law, with Grace obligated to provide child support for our kids while they were in school and cover 50% of their living expenses if they resided on campus. The civil trial for fraud was set to begin in 2 weeks. My kids still refused to speak to their mother, and neither did her side of the family. She had learned the hard way that people will only tolerate so much before walking away forever. April had to endure a meeting arranged by the state's child services with her biological father, which did not go well. She informed him, in the presence of child services representatives, that both he and her mother were dead to her. We attended her grandmother's funeral, after which the lawyer disclosed the substantial inheritance left to us. Overwhelmed, April and I decided to sell her grandmother's home and its contents, except for personal jewelry and a few photos that April wanted. Upon returning home as the school year ended, I prepared for the first day of court on Wednesday when April entered the den. April asked if I could arrange a meeting with Luke, her mom, their lawyers, and Dale on Tuesday, expressing her desire for them to understand the real cost of their actions, an idea suggested by Grandma Beatrice. So I called Dale, and we arranged it. It was a bright, beautiful, sunny day when we sat down with Luke, Grace, and their lawyers. April explained that she requested the meeting to Luke, her biological father, handing him a sealed envelope containing his father's location and his request for him to visit him in jail, disclosing the circumstances of her conception. She revealed that her biological grandmother had left her over $100 million in a trust managed by her father, Edward Adams, until she turned 25, which would have been Luke's if she hadn't been discovered. She warned Luke and Grace of possible legal escalations, urging them to consider mediation before resorting to court. Leaving that meeting, I felt both proud and humbled. My daughter had spoken her truth. Whatever tomorrow held, today I had received the true blessing. Finished.
When I turned 18, my life took a difficult turn. My parents, Rachel and Gregory, and my twin sister, Olivia, decided there wasn't enough space for me at home, essentially forcing me to leave. For the next few years, I struggled with an unstable life, moving from one temporary living situation to another, even living in a tent at one point. I did whatever I could to get by. Despite these challenges, I eventually built a stable life and was able to buy my own house. Now, at 26, just as I've gotten my life in order, my family has suddenly appeared. Led by Olivia, who is now expecting her 4th child, they showed up at my door unannounced, looking to move in. This is the same sister who once pushed for me to be kicked out, saying there wasn't enough room for both of us in our childhood home. Growing up, I always felt like I was treated as less important than Olivia. It was clear Rachel and Gregory preferred her, and they even admitted they wouldn't have had me if Olivia hadn't been conceived. She was always the center of attention, getting all the best toys and clothes, while I barely received enough to keep up appearances. Olivia has always shown selfish, narcissistic traits, likely because of how her parents favor her. Instead of being a supportive sibling, she consistently brought me down. The only person who ever treated me kindly in our family was my grandfather, Edward. He saw how unfairly I was treated, but when he passed away when I was 15, the last bit of kindness in my home disappeared. When Olivia got pregnant as a teenager, Rachel and Gregory married her off to her boyfriend, Liam, and brought him to live in our already crowded house. This left me without even a couch to sleep on. My dad, Gregory, sometimes slept on the living room couch, so that wasn't an option either. With nowhere else to go and being told not to ask relatives for help so the family's dysfunction would stay hidden, I was completely forced out. I ended up living in a tent in our backyard, which happened after the police mistakenly brought me home during a brief period of homelessness. This setup was meant to be a reward for keeping quiet about the reality of my living situation. After years of struggle and hard work, I finally managed to improve my life both physically and emotionally. Now, as my family tries to intrude on the life I've carefully built, I'm at a crossroads, unsure how to deal with their unexpected and unwelcome return. They had once offered me a spot to live in their backyard, but only if I cleaned it up first. Despite the mess, which was littered with flour, sugar, and overrun by rodents, I accepted. At one of the lowest points in my life, I saw this as an opportunity and quickly moved in. Olivia, on the other hand, was relieved to see me go, pointing out that there wasn't enough room for me at her place. No one even asked where I was planning to go. Transforming the backyard into a livable space was tough, especially dealing with the rodent problem, but I eventually made it work. Unfortunately, the situation forced me to drop out of high school just a few months before my final exams. My friends encouraged me to stay in the backyard and finish school, but by that time, I had already given up on that path. Instead, I focused on working, relying solely on my earnings to get by. Before long, I realized I needed to improve my skills for a better future. Gregory was a service technician, and as a kid, I often played with his tools instead of toys, helping him with household repairs. That early experience came in handy later as I decided to invest in my education and eventually got a job at a car manufacturing plant. I worked hard and steadily climbed the career ladder until I became a design manager. Recently, an old friend, Ethan, who was going through a divorce, needed to sell his house quickly. Even though I was hesitant at first, the huge discount and flexible payment plan he offered were too good to pass up, so I decided to buy it. I bought a 4-bedroom house and moved in about 3 weeks ago. To my surprise, my estranged family showed up unannounced at my new home. I hadn't had any contact with them for years, and I lived 17 miles away, so their visit was completely unexpected. I suspect a neighbor who still follows me on social media might have told them where I live. When they barged in, Rachel and Gregory expressed pride in my accomplishments, but it felt strange to see them react to me owning a house at 26, especially since they were still renting. Olivia and Liam wandered around the house as if they were inspecting it to move in. When I confronted them, they vaguely claimed they were just checking on me. It was ironic that they suddenly showed interest in my life, now when I didn't need them anymore. During their visit, Olivia boldly claimed a bedroom for herself, excited about the private bathroom, as though it was already decided that they would move in. Gregory and Rachel tried to calm her down, asking her to manage her children better. In the middle of this chaos, I was shocked and immediately shut down any discussion about them moving in. The situation quickly escalated as they started pushing the idea that I had a moral obligation to house Olivia because of family duty. I stood my ground, reminding them that it was their responsibility, not mine, to provide for their children. I firmly told them to leave my home, making it clear that I wouldn't feel guilty for their poor planning or lack of space. As they left, I felt a sense of peace, knowing I was living on my own terms, free from the pressure of their unwanted expectations. I recalled how, back when I was younger, my grandfather Edward allowed my cousin to sleep on the couch, but when I asked for the same favor, he refused and kicked me out. I vented about how I had struggled, living with rodents in my employer's garage and then in a cramped apartment for 10 years, but no one from my family ever checked on me. When I shared these memories, Rachel began to cry and try to hug me, but I stopped her and insisted they leave. Liam, my brother-in-law, told me to toughen up, bringing up his own hard times and saying I had more than enough space in my house since I was single. I sharply told him to stay quiet. Olivia cursed at me for raising my voice at her husband, but I stood firm and told them they needed to leave or things would escalate. I made them leave before they could argue back. My anger was clear. I had endured their toxic and selfish behavior for too long, and now their greed was obvious. I was no longer the obedient teenager they used to manipulate. If they had pushed any further, I was fully prepared to involve the police. To clarify, Olivia never once offered to pay rent. She and Liam had been freeloading off Rachel and Gregory for over a decade, and now they seemed determined to do the same with me. Despite the clear strain this put on Rachel and Gregory, they never took any steps to encourage Olivia to become independent. Instead, they tried to dump the responsibility onto me. A week after our first confrontation, Rachel returned, but this time she was more direct. She argued that my home had enough room to house Olivia and her family, again mentioning how crowded things were at their place. I stayed firm in my refusal. When persuasion didn't work, she shifted to veiled threats, implying that my large, mostly empty house was a security risk and that having family around would be safer and helpful with household chores. I dismissed her manipulative tactics and told her clearly to leave and not come back. Just a few days later, a neighbor informed me of suspicious activity around my house. He said he had seen a pregnant woman, a man, and a young boy peering through my windows and hanging around the backyard, likely trying to break in. I was grateful for his vigilance, gave him my contact information, and asked him to keep an eye on things. I had planned to install security cameras, but unfortunately, I didn't act fast enough. 5 days later, the same neighbor called to say he thought someone had broken into my home. When I rushed back, I found out he was right. Olivia and Liam had entered through a rear window. When I confronted them, Olivia tried to justify their actions, claiming they had no other choice and accusing me of being unreasonable. As I processed her audacity, Liam smugly commented on how easy it had been. I lost my temper and physically confronted him. Olivia tried to get between us, and in the chaos, their teenage son hit me over the head with a bottle, leaving me bleeding. The situation spiraled out of control, and Olivia called Rachel and Gregory, telling them I was the aggressor. When the police arrived, they began sorting things out while Olivia and Liam frantically apologized, begging the officers not to arrest their son. Despite their pleas, I was ready to press charges against all of them. However, Olivia denied the break-in and assault, claiming it was just a family visit gone wrong and that her son's actions were only a prank. When Rachel and Gregory arrived, they immediately took Olivia's side, pressuring me to drop the charges. They banded together to defend her and tried to make me out to be the vindictive one. Faced with their collective denial and manipulation, I realized they were determined to gaslight me into submission. I was determined not to let my family rewrite the narrative of what had happened in my own home. Thankfully, my neighbor stepped forward with a crucial statement, which ultimately led to the arrest of everyone involved in the assault. They spent the night in jail because Rachel and Gregory couldn't afford their bail. The next morning, while they faced trial, I was at the hospital getting treated for my injuries and making sure there were no internal damages. I took a few days off to recover and press charges for assault, also seeking compensation for my legal fees, which the court granted. Despite Rachel and Gregory's attempts to persuade me to drop the charges, I stood firm. I even threatened legal action against them for their role in orchestrating the attack. Since my nephew is a minor, he was dealt with under juvenile law and only spent a short time in a juvenile facility, with his parents held responsible for restitution, lost wages, and covering my medical expenses. Olivia and Liam were fined heavily. In an attempt to ease their financial burden, they asked the court to allow them to complete part of their fine through community service. Since the incident, things have been relatively quiet. I hope Olivia and Liam have learned their lesson and will keep their distance. However, Rachel and Gregory haven't let this go. Just yesterday, they showed up at my door and waited outside for an hour until I reluctantly let them in. They pleaded for my help, but when it became clear they were speaking on behalf of Olivia, I immediately refused to get involved. That's when they revealed their real reason for visiting. They were getting older, their home was falling apart, and they wanted to move in with me, expecting me to take them in out of duty. I confronted them about their lack of responsibility as parents. They mentioned the idea of giving their house to Olivia, which I saw as another tactic to pressure me. They even suggested that Olivia could pay rent to live in my house, and that I could use it to cover my mortgage. I firmly declined, stating that Olivia needed to handle her own financial problems without my involvement. They continued to plead, arguing that my house was too big for just one person. But I made it clear that my future plans didn't involve staying single or accommodating them out of obligation. Their attempts at emotional manipulation didn't work. I reminded them of how they had treated me in the past and emphasized that I would not be guilted into giving in. It was obvious they were trying to use family ties to their advantage, but I remained firm in setting boundaries to protect my well-being. After they left, visibly upset, I closed the door behind them. Regardless of whatever names they might call me, I resolved not to give in to their demands or let them take advantage of me. This experience has been a harsh reminder of how toxic and manipulative my family can be. Despite their actions, I refuse to let them drag me back into the chaos I've worked so hard to escape. I've built a life of independence and stability, and I intend to keep it that way. Now, I'm ready to move on to the next chapter in my life, stronger and wiser from this experience. I've decided to install security cameras to ensure my home remains my sanctuary and to prevent any further intrusions. No matter how hard they try, I am determined to protect the life I've created for myself. It's not just about keeping them out, it's about finally putting myself first.
Welcome to Lost Relation Chronicles.
She was interested in trying swinging. What was I supposed to do? I'm Ben Collier, 36, an only child. At the start of this story, I'd been married to Emma, formerly Foster, for 11 years. Emma, with her striking red hair, vibrant green eyes, and radiant smile, had always turned heads. We'd both agreed not to have kids. I had no desire to carry on my family line after enduring years of emotional abuse growing up, where my parents' nickname for me was Stupid Mistake. For Emma, the decision was about her career and a concern that having children would change her figure. One weekend morning, while I was wrapping up my coffee and mentally sorting through my list of weekend chores, Emma joined me at the table, something she didn't often do. She looked at me and said, "Ben, I want us to try sex with another couple. You're an amazing husband, but I think there might be something about it that we could enjoy together." I was just dumbfounded and finished my coffee, put the cup in the sink, and walked out of the kitchen and into the master bedroom. Emma followed and said, "Aren't you going to say anything?" "Yes, I am going to say something. Enjoy the rest of your life. I will pack all of your crap and put it on the porch. Take it to whoever put that crap in your mind. The next time we talk will be across the table with a divorce attorney." "What do you mean?" she screamed. "I don't want a divorce. I am not moving out. I am talking about taking a lover, not cheating on you." "Lady, you made 4 statements there, and you were wrong on at least 3 of them. You must want a divorce. I no longer am enough. You are moving out. My a-hole parents left me this house and most of the furniture. You have no claim to it. Don't forget the prenup your loving parents insisted on. As for talking about taking someone else as a sex partner, we did not talk. You made a statement. Also, as far as I am concerned, even though you told me, probably before you did it, planning sex with someone else is cheating. Our marriage vows, not suggestions," vows said, forsaking all others. I was on a roll now. If we were having problems in the bedroom, why am I just now finding out about them? After 11 years, I realized you were not a screamer, but you never asked me to try something different. Did you? She hung her head and stated, "No, I never said anything." "Then this conversation is over. Now either help me pack or get out of here. You need to find somewhere to stay after this weekend, because come Monday you don't live here anymore. Tonight you will sleep in one of the other bedrooms. One more thing. Was I going to be privileged to know who you were going to cheat with?" "I had not decided," she said. "What?" I screamed. "Is there a whole list? And how many have you already taken to bed?" Emma started crying and tried to say something. I just went up to her, turned her around, and led her out of the bedroom. Then I closed the door. We met in high school. I was not what you would call a jock, nor was I a geek. I was, however, an athlete. I ran cross-country and track. Our team was city champion in cross-country, and I was an all-state track member in the mile and half-a-mile runs and the 1-mile relay. We had a great program and were city champs every year I ran. Emma Foster was a shy girl and transferred into the district her junior year. We met in an unusual way. I was a senior, and coming out of a pre-college counseling meeting when I saw Emma was being cornered by a couple of the resident bullies that almost every school has. I hollered at them to back off, and when they turned to tell me to mind my own business, Emma scooted away. That left me to just laugh at the bullies and say, "Sure, guys, but what are you going to do now that you have no one to bully?" They turned around and found an empty wall staring at them. I just walked away. At lunch, that day Emma, I found out her name from a friend of mine in her homeroom, came up to my table and totally surprised me by screaming, "Mind your own business, a-hole. I don't need anyone's help. Just leave me alone." "Okay," I said quietly. "I am sorry you did not get to experience those two jerks' attention. Just ask around about them. I will not interfere again. Are you happy now? If you are, get your face out of my face, and let me enjoy my lunch while I deal with people who have some manners." I know, I was a jerk, but she pissed me off. Emma looked at me like I had 3 eyes and ran out of the lunchroom crying. I finished my lunch and went to my next class. I did not see her for the rest of the day, and just went to practice and afterward went home. My parents were their usual jerky selves, but told me that there was going to be some guests for dinner. You guessed it. Emma and her parents showed up and introductions were made. I shook her parents' hands and told my parents that I would be in my room until the company left. I was still pissed about lunch. My mother was mad. My dad was mad, and our guests, except for Emma, were confused. I just said to everyone, "If you need to know why I will not stay here with you all, ask Emma about school today, and especially about her encounter with the school's resident scumbags this morning." I left, went to my room, and locked the door. That was our first encounter. 18 years later, I wished it could have been the last. Emma spent almost the entire school year trying to apologize, but I wanted nothing to do with it. Toward the end of April, I saw the same bullies had Emma backed up in a corner again, and as I went by, I saw fear in her eyes. I thought, for just a millisecond, that's what you deserve. But I could not just escape the pleading in her eyes that I saw. I just wasn't raised that way. I set my books down and tapped the nearest jerk on the shoulder and asked if this was a private discussion or could I sort of even the odds. I saw the punch coming, and when I ducked, then another scumsucker hit me in the back of the head and I was down for the count. I woke up in the school nurse's office and was told to lay still until the ambulance arrived. I asked what happened, and the nurse said, "A girl ran to the admin office screaming that you were being stomped on by 4 guys in the hall around the corner from the gym. When the hall monitors and principal arrived, all 4 of the guys were still kicking and stomping on you. They were pulled off of you and taken away when the police arrived." I asked what was wrong with me, and she said, "I'm not sure of all of it, but you have a fracture of your cheekbone, a possible broken rib or ribs, and possible internal injuries. Just lay still until the ambulance gets here." That was the last I remembered until I woke up in the hospital. Emma and her parents showed up the next day at visiting hours, and the first thing Emma said was, "Why did you help me again after I acted as I did before? And then you would not even let me apologize all year." I just stared at her for a second and said, "I do not know where you came from, but here most of us do not like bullies. Regardless of what you said to me, I could not let those scumbags do to you what they have done in the past to others." I only thought for a split second to not help. I definitely didn't know about the other 2 guys, or that I would be knocked out with the first punch. If I had known that, I might have thought longer, but it would not have made a difference. My parents are bullies, and I can't stand bullies. As to your apologies, I neither want nor need them. I just want you to leave me alone. The first time those same 2 jerks were bothering you, you screamed at me in front of the entire cafeteria to leave you alone. I did, but you didn't. Then when I tried to help again, I got the crap kicked out of me. Just leave me alone." Emma started crying, and her parents insisted that she explain about the first incident. As I was a captive audience, I finally heard what was happening. One of the scumbags, Jerry Cooper, told Emma he was going to pick her up for a date that coming Friday, and Emma, not liking his attitude, told him in not so polite words to buzz off. Jerry, along with one of his football posse, cornered her and said, "You're going out with me, be ready at 7 o'clock. That was when I interrupted the party the first time. The second time was more of the same, but they said they were waiting for her boyfriend to show up to show her what would happen if she said no. Emma explained to her parents that she was so scared of the 2 boys and so embarrassed by needing my help that she got mad and took it out on me. Her mother said something about how that must have gotten all over the school. Emma said, "Nope, Sir Knight here never said a word to anyone about it, and when people asked me I just said it was personal." Emma's mother was speechless, but not her father. He verbally laid into her for about 5 minutes before security tossed the whole bunch out. I was visited by several of my classmates. One, Thomas Miller, brought his father with him, and the father informed me he was an attorney and offered to represent me in any lawsuits I wanted to file. He also told me that all 4 of the bullies were from rich families and had started a suit against the school for expelling their loving children. The security tapes in Emma's account put a quick stop to that. He then told me that the families had made a major mistake because if they had just let it go, I would only be able to sue the guys involved because of their adult, over 18, status. I asked what it would cost me to sue all the families, the school, and the school district. He stated that he needed $10 and 20% plus expenses of whatever we got. He also said that he had heard of my home life and recommended that I file for early graduation and emancipation to act on my own behalf. I agreed, and he said he would bring the papers ASAP. He said he would do the emancipation first, so I could sign the legal papers. The emancipation was over quickly as the judge was familiar with my situation, and because I was almost 18 myself, it was just a matter of a few months. Mr. Miller had me sign the papers and said that I was being sued for unprovoked violence against Mr. Cooper. At all, I laughed and Mr. Miller chuckled. He said that he had secured the security tapes of the attack and that somehow all of the other copies at the school had been misplaced. He also had the school disciplinary and police records of the guys. The suit was going nowhere. He also said that this suit was a preemptive strike against me suing them. I told him to sue each family individually for $10,000 a day for every day I am in the hospital, out of school, or under a doctor's care, and a flat $2 million for pain and suffering. Mr. Miller laughed and said, I will, and I will add that they will also pay me all of my fees, on top of what you get. I then said, sue the school officials for the failure of their duty to provide a safe environment and the school board for the same thing. Oh, let's say $10 million. We will settle all of the suits for all you can squeeze out of all of them. I added, sue the guys for $10 million each against future earnings and settle that one for all of them pleading guilty to any charges brought against them, and after completing their punishment, permanently removing them from the state and no return for even funerals or weddings without my approval. We shook hands, signed more papers, and Mr. Miller left. A couple of days later, the school district sent several lawyers in to have me sign something. They were extremely angry when I said that I would not sign anything without my attorney's okay. I then told them to go through him before showing up again, or I would have them barred from my room. I also informed them that they could not go through my parents as I was an emancipated minor, and they could no longer sign for me. Mr. Miller called later that same day and said the school system's attorneys had talked to him and offered all medical expenses, $1 million plus 5% legal fees. I told him to accept medical, $4,500,000 and 30% legal fees, and I will release to them a copy of the security tape. He laughed and said I was one evil, vengeful scumsucker. I giggled. I couldn't laugh. It made my ribs hurt, and said, nope, my parents are married. I'm just not sure who to, or who my father is. Later that day they accepted, but required a non-disclosure. I signed the next day. Non-disclosure was not a problem. In fact, I would have insisted on it if I had thought of it. As an added bonus, they presented me with my diploma as I had met all of the graduation requirements. The four families offered combined medical, $5,000 per day in the hospital, and or missed school until my class graduates plus $700,000 no legal expenses. I told Mr. Miller to counter. All medical for my entire life for any and all complications from the injuries split between the four families. Then each family will pay $8,000 per day until I was released from current medical care, $1,250,000 for pain and suffering, and 30% of the total amount of the settlement for legal expenses. For that, they would also get a copy of the missing security tape. I also said non-disclosure was to my advantage, so it would not be a deal-breaker, but make it apply to all parties. Mr. Miller laughed and said, that ought to work. I still wonder about your birth parents' marital status, but I like your style. He said goodbye and hung up the phone. A couple of days later, Mr. Miller came in with some papers and said that families had accepted the deal. I signed the non-disclosure and had Mr. Miller find me a good CPA to take care of the money. A lot of the money was invested in local income properties. The four thugs signed the agreement with the stipulation that I drop all of the charges and lawsuits I filed. I agreed, but after I signed, I laughed and told them that I had not filed any charges. The school and the local DA did. They were pissed and made several threats. Mr. Miller told them that he had recorded their threats and would file on those threats if the pleas to the charges were not made. He also told them that he knew they or their families had taken the security tapes and records, but we had gotten copies before they did it and would produce them at their trials if they did not fully comply with the agreements. They all pled guilty and got 1 year in the county jail. I agreed with the punishment, and they left the state, and I never heard from them again. I got out of the hospital about 5 weeks later, and my dad informed me that he was suing the school system, the four guys' parents, and anyone else they could. After getting over the surprise, I just laughed. My dad asked what I was laughing about. I said, go ahead and sue, but you're wasting the money. I continued, I am an emancipated minor, so you can't sue, but I can and did. I have an attorney, and he informed me that the four guys are all over 18, expelled from school, and not their parents' responsibilities. The school has offered and I accepted a settlement, and I have it in a trust fund that I will get an allowance from until I am 25 when I can get it all, as I am emancipated. If you let me stay here and eat here, I will pay you $350 per month. Otherwise, I am moving out." He screamed. "You ungrateful scumsucker. We deserve something. You caused us a lot of pain. Just pack up your shit and get out." I left later that day. I went to a motel and paid with a debit card my CPA gave me. I found an apartment and moved in until my 18th birthday. I then decided to enlist in the Air Force. I served 2.5 years and was mustered out when my facial injuries required more surgery. The military did the surgery, but I had a severe vision problem in that eye. They gave me an 80% disability and a medical discharge. When I got home, I was informed that my parents had been killed in a single-car accident and that I was the sole beneficiary of their estate as they had not designated any heir, nor had they disowned me. There was a $150,000 insurance policy on my dad and a $75,000 one on my mom. The policies both had a double indemnity clause. I also got my mom's car and the house. About 6 months later, I literally bumped into Emma again. I had gotten surgery on my eye from one of the best eye doctors in the country and was now going to sign up for the local state college. As I was entering the administration building, Emma was coming out. She had one arm full of books and one arm on the door push bar when without looking I pulled it open. She spilled out of the door. I caught her, but her books were all over the ground. She started to get all angry but deflated when she looked and recognized me. She shouted, "Davy, I didn't know you were back." I apologized for messing her books up and proceeded to pick them up for her. She wanted to get together to catch up and asked me to meet her at a local lounge/bar that evening. I agreed. When I got there, Emma was not there yet, so I ordered a burger and a 7-Up. I quit drinking after getting a vicious headache brought on by my injuries and waited for her. She arrived about 10 minutes late and never apologized for it. She ordered her drink and said she had already eaten, but for me to go ahead. As I was eating, Emma filled me in on all that I had missed while I was away. It seems that 2 of Mr. Cooper's friends that attacked me were arrested a couple of states over for murder, and no one had heard anything about the other 2. She told me all about her boyfriends, her breakups, and all of the gossip that I could care less about. After she wound down, she asked about me. I told her about my parents, my military experience, my eye problem and fix, and that while I had a job, that I had enrolled in college and was starting after the next semester. We talked for about an hour, and she said she had to go because she had an early class. She told me how sorry she was about my parents and left. I never asked for her phone number and never gave her mine. So I was blown away when about 3 weeks later she called me in the evening. I asked how she had gotten my number, and she just laughed and said you never changed it when you took over the house. She wanted to know if I liked live theater when I said yes. She invited me to a play that weekend. I agreed, but only if she let me buy dinner. We agreed. The play was fun, and I got her phone number. We dated regularly, and for me exclusively, for about 6 months, with no sex. Then she wanted to take a break. I was pissed but chalked it up to the unknown feminine mind. I did not hear from her for several months. When she called me again, I told her I was in a semi-serious friend with benefits relationship and was still P.O.D. about her break. I was polite but firm and asked her not to call again. I said if my relationship ended, I would call her if I wanted to get back together. She hung up on me. My friends with benefits lady fell in love with someone and left the city with him. I enjoyed her company, her conversation, and the sex was great, but there was very little emotional attachment. I dated several ladies and continued through another year of school. I did not call Emma. I saw her several times throughout the school year and around the town on the weekends. She always seemed to be with a different guy. When I returned to the campus the next semester, I heard through the grapevine that one of the professors had been fired for having sex with Emma. I also heard that Emma had transferred to another school. Semester break corresponded with Christmas. I was surprised when Emma called me at my house. It had been quite a while since she had given me the "I need a break" message. I had gotten past the hurt and anger. We talked for a long time, and I finally asked her if she wanted to meet for coffee sometime during school break. She mentioned a small on-campus coffee house at 10 o'clock the next morning. I said okay and goodbye. I was there at 9:50 and got a coffee and a seat by the window. I watched as Emma pulled into the parking lot a couple of minutes later. It was before 10 o'clock, but she sat in her car until 10:10. Then she walked in and saw me. She smiled, ordered her drink, and walked over and sat down. She never apologized for being late and did not seem to notice that I was steamed. I finished my coffee, paid my bill, told Emma that she should call me again when she decided to stop playing games. I told her I noticed when she pulled in the lot and that I had better things to do than wait for someone who has to make an entrance. I left. Emma called me later that afternoon and apologized. She said she had forgotten about how I felt about punctuality. She asked if we could try again. In a fit of total stupidity, I said let's try coffee, same time, same place. She said okay. When I got there, she was sitting where I had been the day before. I got my coffee and sat down next to her. I said hi and asked how she was doing. After the usual personal talk, I asked how she was doing at her new school. Emma got a shocked look and asked how I knew about that. When I told her that the firing of the professor and that she had transferred, she just looked down at her coffee and said, "Not my finest moment," she continued. "I was stupid, childish, and selfish. I thought that he would be a help to me in school. After his wife and another professor caught us, I found out that he had a different co-ed almost every school year. I was just the latest bimbo." I didn't say much, just reached out and patted the back of the hand she had on the table. She smiled. I said that if she wanted to, perhaps we could go to a movie or to dinner during the break. She got a big smile and said, "How about this weekend?" We swapped cell phone numbers and agreed to talk later in the week. We went out that weekend, and it was like nothing had changed between us. We continued going out when the school allowed. After I graduated and started a new job in my hometown, I was hired as a dispatch supervisor for a local package delivery company. Emma ended up back in town also, so we started dating seriously again. After 6 months, I asked her to marry me, and she said yes. That is when the prenup came into the mix. Emma knew I had some money, but her parents did not. Emma had a small trust fund from a grandfather. Her father insisted on a prenup to protect Emma's money. I talked to Mr. Miller, and he said don't sign anything until he looks at it. I told him about Emma knowing I had some money, but not how much. I also said that Emma's parents did not know anything about my wealth. I wanted the same or better protection than Emma if I were to sign any prenup. Mr. Foster was very fair, and the proposed prenup protected everything that was an individual property or possession. Any assets that we accumulated together would be divided evenly in the event of marriage failure. The wedding was great, as were the first 10+ years of the marriage. In the last 8 months, Emma started closing me out of a lot of her life. She started going out with some of her co-workers, and our sex life went at almost zero. That is when she sprung the "we should try swinging" statement. Emma was totally surprised by my response to her statement. I left for work the following Monday. About halfway there, I wondered what had caused the change in Emma. I pulled over and called work and said I needed to take a few days off for a personal emergency. I called Emma's cell phone, thinking that she went to work. I got the phone as not in service message, so I knew she had turned it off. I then called home, and a weepy Emma answered. I told her I had taken a few days off and was going to a motel to do some thinking. I also told her that I was extremely hurt and very angry right now, and that I did not think that with how things had been going in our marriage that it would survive. I asked her to go somewhere for a few hours so I could come to the house and get some clothes. I told her I was not going to an attorney yet, but I was going to try to figure out if we could get over this. She cried some more and said, "Okay, I will go to visit my mother for a couple of hours." We said our goodbyes, and I went to a local motel and booked a room for a couple of nights. I went home, and after taking enough clothes to last for 3 days, I decided to write Emma a letter to give her enough information to understand where I stand. After sitting at the computer, I composed a brief letter to let her know that things, as I saw them, were broke. Dear Emma, you told me Saturday that I was a great husband. I do not believe you really feel that way. Let me tell you why I say that. If I am such a great husband, why have you been going out with your co-workers every week? But every time I ask to take you out to dinner, you're too tired, don't feel good, or don't want to. If I am such a great husband, how come you have not tried to initiate making love for over 8 months, and when I try, you are too tired, don't feel good, or don't want to, or give me a mercy sex? If I am such a great husband, why have you started picking fights over some of the silliest things? Things like me mowing the lawn, not mowing the lawn, taking the garbage out, not taking the garbage out? You even tried to start an argument about me not emptying the dishwasher without even looking in it. I had emptied the clean and loaded it with dirty dishes, and all you did was look embarrassed. Yet you did not apologize and just left the room. These are just a few of the things I have seen in the last months. If you don't love me, or I am not enough for you, we can get a divorce. If that is what you want, I will agree with it. I will insist on the enforcement of the prenup, but you can have everything else we have accumulated during our marriage. If you do not want a divorce, you need to make a major attitude adjustment, because I was already to ask for at least a separation because of what you have done and how you have acted recently. I will bet that if you think about it, the co-workers that you go out with are either divorced or on their second or third marriages. I would also bet that the swinging idea was put out there by one of that group. I know you probably think that I am overreacting, but I will not willingly share with you while we are married. If I find out you have already had sex with someone, we are done. Do you understand that? Think about all of this. Ben. I put the note and my wedding ring on the coffee maker and left. I did not hear from Emma until the next afternoon. I had all kinds of thoughts going through my head. Was she checking with her friends, her lover, perhaps her parents? I finally decided that I needed honest answers and hired an investigator to check on her for the next 2 weeks. When Emma did call, we talked and I said I would return to talk the next day, but she needed to sleep in the guest bedroom or leave because until I was over my hurt, I did not want to have her touch me. She cried and said, "Okay, I will see you tomorrow night." Well, when I got back to my house, Emma was not in sight, and when I went in the bedroom, all of her clothes were out of the closets and her dresser drawers were empty. Whether they were in the guest bedroom or out of the house entirely, I did not know, and I was not going to go look. Emma came out of the guest room and asked if I was hungry. She acted like she had not even read the note. I did not make any comment about her attitude, but I just said, "I didn't come here to eat. I want answers. The need for you to leave will depend on those answers. Remember, you can't lie to me for shit. I can always tell when you are not truthful. Are you going to answer the questions?" She looked down at the floor and mumbled something. She looked up with tears in her eyes and said, "I will go to my parents for a while." I responded. That response answers all of the questions that I had except for one or two. Who is the man you are cheating with, or is there more than one? I know that you have someone because, in 10 years of marriage, you were never like this until the last few months. Just do not tell your parents that I caused this problem, because I will talk to them and let them know what is going on. I am also going to file for a legal separation and freeze all of our credit cards and bank accounts. If you will answer all of my questions and concerns, we may be able to get through these problems. If you don't want to answer, just tell me and we can end this with a divorce. Emma just sort of slumped her shoulders and without looking at me said, "I don't know why you think I have cheated. I don't want a separation or a divorce." I gave her a curt laugh and said, "Okay, if you don't want a separation or a divorce, you had better go see a psychiatrist, find out where your shitty attitude came from. I will not put up with it. I also do not believe your denial of cheating. So give me the names of the ladies that you are with on your ladies' night out. I can't and won't stand for these accusations. So go ahead and file for your goddamn divorce, but I will rip you a new hole in the settlement." She screamed. I just shook my head and said, "Okay, I will see an attorney in the morning. I have protected my assets and yours, so all you can go after is what we have accumulated since we got married. I will make it easy. You can have it all. I have enough to get by. So the funds we have built up are yours." I then gave her my final verbal shot. "Just remember, I was willing to talk through some of our problems, but just like the last several months you have shut me out. If you can live with that, have a good life." Emma started to sob, grabbed her purse and left. That wasn't the end, of course. My phone was bombarded all the next week by calls from Emma's parents, her friends, and somehow, she even got some of my friends to call. They all asked me what I did to hurt Emma. When I tried to explain, I was almost always stopped and was told that that was not what Emma said. From her family and friends, I sort of expected that, but I told my friends to think back on all of my actions and decide if they wanted to be my friend still. I let them know that while it was none of their business, they had to decide if they believed Emma or me. I lost a lot of my friends, and when they wanted to reconnect, I had them call Emma. I got the report from the PI and found out that Emma was not staying with her parents, but with her boss in an apartment in town. That made me laugh because my trust fund owned the building. I called the building manager and got copies of all of the security tapes of the hallways and lobby. I also asked for a copy of his lease agreement. I gave all of that information and videos to my attorney. Then I got served with divorce papers and a lawsuit to void the prenup. Now that pissed me off. I called my lawyer and countersued for adultery and named her boss as correspondent. I also had my lawyer serve the boss with an eviction notice to be served at his home when his wife was home. The lease agreement was for single occupancy and guests could not stay more than 3 days without an additional fee. Emma had stayed for more than a week. Things went along for a couple of days after Emma was served. Then she called and said she was ready to talk to me. I asked if she was ready to be completely honest and to let the people who have harassed me that same truth. When she said yes, I agreed to meet her at a local coffee shop. I did say that she was not to bring her boss with her. She gasped but said okay. My lawyer did not want me to go but told me to record the entire meeting. I really did not know what to expect, so I brought copies of the investigator's report and the pictures taken from the videos from the apartment building. I did not bring the videos because they only showed the hallways. When I got there, Emma was late, but this time she apologized. "I'm sorry for being late. Something was going on in a street near work, and I had to take a very different route and got slightly lost." I waved it off, then told Emma that I was going to record this meeting, as my lawyer had told me to do. I started the recorder, gave the date, time, and location of the recording being made. I then asked Emma if she understood that I was recording the conversation. First, she just nodded, but I insisted that her verbal answer. With almost clenched teeth, she said, "I don't like it, but I understand that you are recording. You're doing this is making me angry, but you are setting the parameters." I then asked if she was going to answer all of my questions and concerns. I then said, "This is just a preliminary meeting. I do not guarantee that we will be back together after this meeting, but if I am not satisfied with the way this discussion goes, based on your honesty, candidness, and completeness, we will not get back together. Do you understand?" Emma sobbed and said, "Yes, I understand what you said. What I don't understand is why you are being such an angry a-hole." I just laughed and said, "Your actions over the last 7+ months are why. Now you said you were ready to answer all of my questions. Are you really ready?" "Yes," she said. "Okay, you said you were ready to answer all of my questions. The first question is, have you had sex with anyone other than myself since we got engaged and married?" Before you answer, BJ, contrary to Bill Clinton's claims, is still sex. "Yes," she said. Next question is a multi-part one. How many different people have you had sex with during that time? What are all of their names? Have you stopped? There have been 2, but only one since we have been married. I will not give you their names. I have stopped as of 2 days ago when my lover lost the lease on his apartment in town and had to go back to his wife. I decided to rub it in a little. So you have cheated with a cheater, is that right? Yes. I then zinged her with the next question. Would your cheating with the cheater have continued if you had been able to stay in that 4th-floor apartment of your lover's? Yes. And how do you know where his apartment is? I slid a stack of 8-inch by 10-inch pictures captured from the videos. Emma let out a screech and ran out of the meeting. I did not see or hear from her or her lawyer until our first court appearance. She brought her parents, her boss, and a couple of friends. I just looked at the group and smiled. I did not say a thing. The first thing the judge asked was if all interested parties were sure the marriage was irreparably damaged. My lawyer, Mr. Miller, said yes. Emma's lawyer said no. Her lawyer then brought up the motion to vacate the prenup. The judge looked over his glasses at the attorney and said, "Both parties signed and filed the prenup. If your client wants to vacate it, may I ask why?" The lawyer gulped and said, "My client's husband has substantial assets that my client was unaware of at the time of signing. The prenup was requested by my client's family to protect her assets." The judge scowled. "Let me get this straight. Your client and her family proposed the prenup, and now that your client finds that there is premarital money on her husband's side, she wants to vacate her agreement. Is that a fair statement?" The lawyer started to sweat and gulped again. "Yes, Your Honor." Motion denied. If the divorce is granted, the prenup will be enforced. With that statement, Emma's boss got up from his seat and left the courtroom. I whispered to my lawyer, "Now I know where the attempt to overturn the prenup came from." Emma's lawyer then stood back up and said, "My client now requests marriage counseling." The judge looked to our bench. I shook my head and Mr. Miller stated, "My client feels that counseling would only prolong the pain of his spouse's betrayal and breaking of their marriage vows." He continued, "My client is willing to surrender all of the joint assets accumulated during the marriage, but feels that the evidence of an adulterous affair has caused him to just want out of the marriage and to continue on with his life." The judge popped upright in his chair. He asked, "You mentioned an affair. I hope you have evidence of that, or I may revisit my prior ruling." "We do, Your Honor, and if necessary, we are prepared to present Mrs. Bowyer's recorded admission." An admission she agreed to have recorded. Emma's lawyer jumped up. "My client did not agree to any recording. A recording was made, but my client did not agree to it." Mr. Miller stood and said, "Your Honor, we have the tape and the vocal agreement to be recorded will be heard. We are amenable to a delay while opposing counsel has an opportunity to listen to the entire tape and also see all of the video and photographic evidence of his client living with her supervisor when she left the marriage house." Emma's lawyer conferred with Emma then said, "My client withdraws all objections to the dissolution of the marriage and does not need to see the evidence. We stipulate the complainant's request is accurate." The judge looked at both desks. If both parties are in agreement, the claimant's request for dissolution is granted. The financial settlement as follows. Claimant will, as the injured party receives 90% of all assets acquired during the marriage. Claimant will be granted unrequested spousal support of $500 per month for a period of 10 years, or until he remarries. These financial settlements are imposed as punishment for the offending party's actions. I suggest that the two parties sit down and agree to a different settlement. These orders will become final in 91 days. Bowyer versus Bowyer case adjourned. Somehow, I was not pleased with the judgment. It just affirmed that my marriage was a failure. The attorneys negotiated the financials, and I got a small lump sum settlement and strict enforcement of the prenup. I donated all of the lump sum to the local woman's shelter. I did not want or need it. Emma's boss was sued for divorce by his wife, and he was in a similar situation as Emma. All of the money was hers. I got what she didn't. He was fired and left town. Emma somehow kept her job. Neither one of us was at the reading of the final decree. I did not see her for over 2 years. I did keep in touch with her parents, and they remained friends. I saw Emma recently, and she seems to have lost her joy. She was kind of frumpy, no makeup, baggy clothes, and stringy hair. I did not talk to her as what she did was still a raw wound. Life is a voyage, and Emma was an unexpected detour. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
Subscribe Cheating Tales Lab for more original and exclusive stories. We hope you enjoy this one. Let's begin. The Detroit skyline loomed in the rearview mirror as Jake's battered pickup rumbled down the street. His calloused hands gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white from the strain of a 14-hour shift. At 35, Jake's body felt older than his years, worn down by the relentless grind of construction work. As he pulled into the driveway of his modest home, Jake's eyes flickered to the empty spot where Sarah's car should be. A familiar pang of unease twisted in his gut. Things hadn't been right between them for months now. The house was quiet as Jake trudged through the front door, his work boots leaving dusty imprints on the worn linoleum. He made his way to the kitchen, drawn by the siren call of a cold beer. That's when he saw it, Sarah's phone on the counter. Its screen lit up with a notification. Jake froze, his hand halfway to the fridge handle. The notification was from a group chat labeled Girls Trip Group. His wife's recent emotional distance flashed through his mind, fueling a surge of suspicion. "This isn't right," Jake muttered, even as he reached for the phone. Guilt warred with a desperate need to know as he swiped open the message. His breath caught in his throat. There, illuminated by the harsh glow of the screen, was a photo that shattered his world. Sarah, her smile radiant, leaned into the frame, but it was a hand resting possessively on her lower back that sent ice through Jake's veins. He'd recognize that ring anywhere. It belonged to his brother, Mike. With trembling fingers, Jake navigated to Sarah's text messages. The most recent exchange with Mike burned itself into his brain. "Sarah, missing you." "Mike, me too, darling. Can't stop thinking about our weekend in Chicago. Let's plan another getaway soon." Jake's too wrapped up in work to notice anything. The crunch of tires on gravel jolted Jake back to reality. Sarah was home. He quickly replaced the phone and retreated to the garage, his mind reeling from the betrayal. Jake grabbed a wrench and bent over his motorcycle, feigning work as he heard Sarah's key in the lock. His heart hammered in his chest, a toxic mix of rage and heartbreak threatening to overflow. "Jake!" Sarah's voice called out. "You home?" "In here," he managed to grunt, not trusting himself to say more. Sarah appeared in the doorway, her smile faltering as she took in Jake's tense posture. "Everything okay?" Jake nodded tersely, keeping his eyes fixed on the bike's engine. "Long day. Gonna tinker for a bit before dinner." As Sarah's footsteps faded, Jake's grip on the wrench tightened until his knuckles turned white. His world had just imploded, and he had no idea what to do next. The next morning dawned gray and dreary, matching Jake's mood perfectly. He arrived at the construction site early, desperate for the distraction of physical labor. But as he maneuvered the crane into position, his mind kept drifting to Sarah and Mike. The betrayal ate at him, making it hard to focus. "Jake, watch it!" Tom's shout snapped Jake back to reality, just as the crane's load swung dangerously close to a group of workers. Jake's heart raced as he quickly corrected course, narrowly avoiding disaster. Tom stormed over, his face thunderous. "My office. Now!" the foreman barked. Jake followed Tom to the cramped trailer that served as the site office, bracing himself for the inevitable ass-chewing. To his surprise, Tom's expression softened as he closed the door behind him. "What's going on with you, Jake?" Tom asked, concern evident in his voice. "You've been one of my best guys for years. I've never seen you this distracted." Jake debating how much to reveal. "Just personal stuff. Won't happen again." Tom studied him for a moment. "Look, I don't need details, but if you need to take a day or two to sort things out, do it. Can't have you endangering yourself or the crew." Jake nodded, grateful for the unexpected understanding. "Thanks, Tom. I appreciate it, but I'd rather keep working, keep my mind off things." "All right," Tom relented, "but one more close call, and you're on mandatory leave." Got it, Jake agreed. As he left the trailer, Jake overheard a group of his co-workers huddled together, their voices low and concerned. "Third site hit this month." One of them was saying, "Whoever's behind these break-ins knows their stuff." Jake slowed his pace, listening intently. "Gotta be an inside job." Vince, the site's elderly security guard, chimed in. "They're bypassing security systems like they built M themselves." The conversation shifted as Jake approached, but the seed of an idea had already taken root in his mind. If there was a way to get involved in these thefts, it could be his ticket out, a chance at revenge and financial security all in one. After his shift ended, Jake found himself in front of the Rusty Nail, a dive bar he hadn't visited in years. The neon sign flickered weakly in the twilight as Jake pushed open the grimy door. The smell of stale beer and cigarettes hit him like a wall. Jake scanned the dim interior until he spotted a familiar face hunched over the bar. "Daryl," Jake called out as he approached. The man's head snapped up, bloodshot eyes widening in recognition. "Well, I'll be damned. Jake Buford, as I live and breathe. What brings you to this fine establishment?" Jake settled onto the cracked vinyl bar stool next to Daryl. "Just felt like a change of scenery," he said casually. "How have you been?" Daryl snorted. "Oh, staying busy." His eyes darted around the bar before he leaned in closer. "Word is you're still in construction. Bet you hear all sorts of interesting things." Jake's pulse quickened. This was the opening he'd been hoping for. He signaled the bartender for a beer before responding. "Funny you should mention that," Jake said, keeping his voice low. "There's been some talk about break-ins at job sites. High-end equipment getting lifted. Sounds like a pretty sophisticated operation." Daryl's eyebrows shot up. "That's so? Hypothetically speaking, of course. But a guy might be interested in more details about something like that, if he knew the right people to talk to." Jake took a long pull from his beer, weighing his next words carefully. "Hypothetically, a guy might be looking to get involved in something like that, if the price was right." A slow grin spread across Daryl's face. "Well now, that's mighty interesting. Hypothetically speaking, of course. Why don't we step outside for a smoke and continue this fascinating hypothetical conversation?" As they exited into the alley behind the bar, Jake felt a mix of excitement and trepidation. He was stepping into dangerous territory, but the thought of Sarah and Mike's betrayal steeled his resolve. This was his chance to take control, to hit back at a world that had sucker-punched him. Over the next 2 weeks, Jake threw himself into gathering intelligence. Every spare moment was devoted to uncovering the depths of Sarah and Mike's betrayal, while simultaneously laying the groundwork for his own illicit activities. Jake volunteered for night shifts at various construction sites, using the time to study security systems and identify valuable equipment. His co-workers chalked up his sudden enthusiasm to trying to escape whatever was troubling him at home. They had no idea how right they were. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, Jake found himself parked across the street from the Moonlight Motel, a seedy establishment on the outskirts of town. Like clockwork, Sarah's car would pull in at 7 p.m., followed shortly by Mike's flashy sports car. They always took room 212. The first time Jake saw them together, laughing as they hurried into the room, he nearly lost it. His hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly he thought it might snap. But as the rage subsided, a cold determination took its place. He would make them pay, but on his terms. One Tuesday afternoon, Jake found himself standing outside Mike's apartment, a set of lockpicks in his trembling hands. He'd learned the skill in his misspent youth, never imagining he'd need to use it against his own brother. The lock gave way with a soft click. Jake slipped inside, his heart pounding. He worked quickly, planting hidden cameras in strategic locations. As he searched for any additional evidence of Mike's betrayal, Jake stumbled upon a treasure trove of incriminating financial documents. Apparently, Mike's infidelity wasn't his only secret. Jake uncovered clear evidence of tax evasion and fraudulent business dealings. It was almost too perfect. Just as Jake finished photographing the damning paperwork, he heard voices in the hallway. Panic gripped him as he recognized Mike's laugh. Jake barely made it to the stairwell before the apartment door opened. Pressed against the wall, Jake held his breath as Mike passed by, Sarah's favorite flowers clutched in his hand. The sight reignited Jake's fury, cementing his resolve. There would be no mercy. That night, as Sarah slept peacefully beside him, Jake hunched over his laptop in the dim light of the basement. His fingers flew across the keyboard as he researched wilderness survival techniques and remote cabin rentals. A plan was taking shape in his mind, a way to exact his revenge while securing his own future. It was risky, potentially devastating if it went wrong. But as Jake glanced at the wedding photo on his desk, Sarah's smiling face now a mockery of their vows, he knew he had nothing left to lose. The pieces were falling into place. Soon, very soon, he would spring the trap. And when the dust settled, Jake would emerge victorious, or go down in flames trying. Jake sat in the darkness of his basement, the glow of his laptop screen casting eerie shadows across his face. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, trembling slightly as he prepared to set his plan in motion. With a deep breath, he clicked send on an anonymous tip to the IRS, detailing Mike's financial irregularities. "Let's see how you like being stabbed in the back, brother," Jake muttered, a smile twisting his features. Over the next few weeks, Jake's life became a carefully choreographed dance of deception. By day, he was the model employee, throwing himself into his work with renewed vigor. But as soon as darkness fell, he transformed into something else entirely. Using the knowledge gleaned from his night shifts, Jake orchestrated a series of small-scale thefts at various construction sites across Detroit. He moved like a ghost, bypassing security systems with ease and selecting only the most valuable, portable equipment. After each heist, Jake would meet Daryl in dimly lit parking lots or seedy bars to fence the stolen goods. The wads of cash he received in return felt like victory in his hands. "You're a natural at this, Jake," Daryl remarked one night, eyes glinting with admiration and a hint of wariness. "Just don't get too greedy, yeah?" Jake nodded, pocketing the money. "Don't worry. I know exactly what I'm doing." At home, Sarah's behavior shifted. She became increasingly distant, her eyes darting nervously whenever Jake entered the room. Her excuses to leave the house grew more frequent and paper-thin. "Book club again?" Jake asked one evening, his tone carefully neutral as Sarah grabbed her keys. "Yeah, we're discussing a really complex novel. Might run late," Sarah replied, unable to meet his gaze. As she hurried out the door, Jake allowed himself a small, bitter laugh. He played the role of the unsuspecting husband to perfection, all the while feeling the weight of his growing emergency fund hidden in the basement. Mike paced his office, phone pressed to his ear. "What do you mean an audit? There must be some mistake." The IRS agent on the other end remained unmoved. "I'm sorry, Mr. Buford, but we received information that requires a thorough investigation of your finances. All your accounts will be frozen until we complete our review." As Mike's world began to crumble around him, Sarah found herself increasingly alone. Her calls and texts went unanswered, their clandestine meetings abruptly canceled. Guilt and fear gnawed at her, driving her to seek comfort in the last place she expected, Jake's arms. "I'm sorry I've been so distant lately," Sarah whispered one night, curling up next to Jake on the couch. "Work's been crazy and I feel like we've lost our connection." Jake's arm tightened around her, his face a mask of concern and understanding. Inside, his heart raced with a mixture of triumph and disgust. "I've been feeling it too," he murmured, stroking her hair. "Maybe we need to get away for a bit. Just the two of us. Reconnect." Sarah's eyes lit up. "Really? That sounds wonderful. Where were you thinking?" Jake smiled, the trap snapping shut. "I found this great little cabin upstate. Totally secluded, beautiful scenery. Perfect for leaving all our problems behind for a weekend." As Sarah enthusiastically agreed, Jake felt a twinge of something: regret, sadness for what might have been. He pushed it aside, focusing on the next phase of his plan. At work, Jake's productivity soared. He channeled all his anger and pain into his job, impressing Tom and his fellow workers with his dedication. "I don't know what's got into you lately, Jake," Tom remarked one afternoon, clapping him on the shoulder. "But keep it up. I'm thinking you might be ready for more responsibility around here." Jake nodded, allowing himself a moment of genuine pride. "Thanks, Tom. I appreciate the opportunity." As Jake left Tom's office, he noticed a new face on the site, a sharp-eyed woman in a crisp suit, talking intently with Vince, the security guard. "That's Detective Carter," Vince informed him later, his voice low. "She's investigating all these break-ins. Interviewed half the crew already." Jake's pulse quickened, but he kept his expression neutral. "Yeah? What'd she think happened?" Vince shrugged. "Not sure, but she's thorough. Been asking a lot about security protocols, work schedules, that sort of thing." Jake nodded thoughtfully. "Well, I hope they catch whoever's responsible. It's making everyone nervous." As he walked away, Jake's mind raced. He'd need to be extra careful now, with the police sniffing around. But he was too close to back out now. The cabin trip was only days away, and everything was falling into place. The night before the cabin trip, Jake's nerves were on edge. He'd volunteered for the late shift, telling Sarah he wanted to tie up loose ends before their getaway. In reality, he had one last, crucial task to complete. Under the cover of darkness, Jake moved swiftly through the construction site. His intimate knowledge of the security systems allowed him to disable them with ease. He worked methodically, gathering a significant haul of expensive equipment. But this time, instead of fencing the goods, Jake carefully planted evidence. A cigarette, but with Mike's preferred brand. A scrap of paper with numbers matching Mike's handwriting. A single strand of hair that could have come from either brother. As he finished, Jake took a moment to survey his handiwork. It was almost poetic, he thought, how perfectly everything was coming together. The next morning, Jake and Sarah set out for the cabin. The car ride was tense, filled with awkward small talk and long silences. As they wound their way up into the mountains, Sarah's phone began to buzz incessantly. "Everything okay?" Jake asked, feigning concern as Sarah's face grew increasingly pale. It's Mike," Sarah stammered, her voice shaking. "He says the IRS has frozen all his accounts, and now the police are investigating him for some kind of theft ring. Jake, I don't understand what's happening." Jake reached over, squeezing her hand. "Hey, it's all right. I'm sure it's just a misunderstanding. Why don't we turn off our phones for the weekend? Give ourselves a chance to focus on us, like we planned." Sarah hesitated, then nodded, switching off her phone. Jake did the same, feeling a surge of anticipation. There was no turning back now. As they arrived at the cabin, Jake marveled at how peaceful it looked, the perfect setting for the storm he was about to unleash. They spent the afternoon settling in, taking a short hike and preparing dinner together. As night fell, Jake knew it was time. "Sarah," he said softly, setting down his wine glass, "there's something we need to talk about." The color drained from Sarah's face as Jake slowly, methodically laid out the evidence of her affair. Photos from the hidden cameras, printouts of text messages, hotel receipts, a damning trail of betrayal. Sarah broke down, tears streaming down her face as she confessed everything. "I'm so sorry, Jake," she sobbed. "I never meant for any of this to happen. Please, you have to believe me. I love you, I do." Jake let the silence stretch, watching Sarah squirm. Finally, he spoke, his voice surprisingly gentle. I think maybe we can work through this. It won't be easy, but if we both want it. Sarah's eyes lit up with desperate hope. Really? Oh, Jake, I'll do anything. I'll go to counseling. I'll quit my job. Whatever it takes. Jake nodded, standing up. Let's take some time to process. How about I make us both a drink? Something to calm our nerves. As he walked to the kitchen, Jake allowed himself a small, victorious smile. From his pocket, he withdrew a small vial, a powerful sedative courtesy of Daryl's connections. With steady hands, he prepared 2 glasses, adding the colorless, odorless liquid to Sarah's. Returning to the living room, Jake handed Sarah her drink. To new beginnings, he said, raising his glass. Sarah took a long sip, relief evident on her face. To new beginnings, she echoed. As they talked, Jake watched Sarah's eyes grow heavy, her speech slurring slightly. Within minutes, she was unconscious on the couch. Jake stood over her, a complex mix of emotions swirling in his chest. Part of him wanted to shake her awake, to scream and rage at her for destroying their life together. But a colder, more calculating part knew that this was just the beginning. He checked Sarah's pulse, ensuring the sedative hadn't been too strong. Satisfied, he began to move quickly, setting the final stages of his plan into motion. The first rays of dawn crept through the cabin windows as Jake stirred. He blinked, momentarily disoriented, before the events of the previous night came rushing back. Sarah lay motionless on the couch, still under the influence of the powerful sedative. Jake moved quickly, gathering his things and erasing all traces of his presence. He paused at the door, looking back at Sarah's sleeping form. For a moment, he felt a flicker of doubt, but he squashed it ruthlessly. There was no going back now. The drive back to Detroit was a blur of adrenaline and anticipation. Jake's mind raced, going over every detail of his plan. He pulled into the construction site parking lot just as the early shift was arriving. "Jake, thought you were on vacation," Tom called out, surprise evident in his voice. Jake feigned embarrassment. "Yeah, about that. Sarah wasn't feeling well, so we came back early. Figured I might as well get some work done." Tom nodded sympathetically. "Sorry to hear that. Well, we can always use the extra hands." As Jake immersed himself in work, he couldn't help but wonder what was unfolding back at the cabin. He imagined Sarah waking up, confused and alone. The thought brought a satisfaction. Miles away, Mike Buford was a man on the edge. His carefully constructed life was crumbling around him. The IRS audit had frozen his accounts, and now the police were sniffing around, asking pointed questions about construction site thefts. In a moment of desperation, Mike remembered Sarah mentioning a cabin getaway. It was a long shot, but he was out of options. He needed help, and Sarah was the only person he could turn to now. With shaking hands, Mike threw some clothes into a duffel bag and headed for his car. He'd have to use cash, avoid main roads. As he pulled out of his driveway, Mike couldn't shake the feeling that he was driving straight into a trap. Back at the cabin, Sarah's eyes fluttered open, her head pounded, and her mouth felt like it was stuffed with cotton. She sat up slowly, trying to piece together what had happened. Where was Jake? A noise outside made her freeze. Footsteps on the porch, then a familiar voice calling her name. "Mike!" Sarah croaked, stumbling to the door. "What are you doing here? Where's Jake?" Mike burst in, his eyes wild with panic. "Sarah, thank God. We've got to get out of here. Something's gone terribly wrong." As Mike rambled about frozen accounts and police investigations, Sarah's fog began to clear. She remembered Jake confronting her about the affair, showing her evidence. But after that, nothing. "Mike, stop," Sarah interrupted. "Jake knows. About us. He had pictures, messages, everything." Mike's face drained of color. "What? How? Oh, God. Sarah, I think we've been set up." As the reality of their situation sank in, Sarah and Mike looked at each other with growing horror. They'd walked right into an elaborate trap, and they had no idea how to escape it. Miles away, Jake slipped away from the job site, a burner phone clutched in his hand. With steady fingers, he dialed the police tip line. "I'd like to report a sighting of 2 fugitives," he said, disguising his voice. "At a cabin off Route 7. You'd better hurry." They looked ready to run. Sarah's hands shook as she tried to start her car. Nothing, not even a sputter. "It won't start," she called to Mike, panic rising in her voice. Mike slammed the hood of his own vehicle in frustration. "Mine's dead too. He must have sabotaged them." The distant wail of police sirens sent a jolt of terror through them both. Without a word, they turned and ran for the dense forest surrounding the cabin. Branches whipped at their faces as they crashed through the underbrush. Sarah's fashionable boots, meant for city streets, not wilderness flight, threatened to betray her with every step. "We can't outrun them," Mike panted. "We need to find somewhere to hide." As the sounds of pursuit grew closer, Sarah and Mike pushed deeper into the unfamiliar terrain, desperation lending speed to their tired legs. Back in Detroit, Jake played his part to perfection. He paced the floor of the police station, the very picture of a concerned husband and brother. Detective Lynn Carter watched him with sharp eyes. "Mr. Buford, when was the last time you saw your wife?" "Yesterday morning. We were supposed to go to a cabin for the weekend, but I got called into work at the last minute. Sarah went ahead without me." He paused, letting his voice crack slightly. "I should have gone with her. If I had known." "And your brother?" Carter pressed. "When did you last have contact with him?" Jake's expression darkened convincingly. "Not for weeks. We had a falling out. I never imagined he'd be involved in something like this." As Jake spun his tale of betrayal and shock, he could see the sympathy in the eyes of the officers around him. Even the hard-nosed detective Carter seemed to be softening. "Mr. Buford," she said, her tone gentler now, "I know this is difficult, but we need to know about the cabin. Any information you can give us could be crucial." Jake hesitated, as if wrestling with his conscience. I don't want to believe Sarah's involved in Mike's crimes, but if there's any chance she's in danger or being held against her will." He took a deep breath. "I'll tell you everything I know." As Jake reluctantly provided details about the cabin's location, a flurry of activity erupted around him. Officers rushed to coordinate with state police, organizing a large-scale manhunt. Jake sank into a chair, accepting a sympathetic pat on the shoulder from a young officer. Inside, he felt a surge of triumph. Everything was going according to plan. In the forest, Sarah and Mike huddled beneath a rocky overhang, listening to the sounds of searchers in the distance. They were cold, hungry, and utterly lost. "How could we have been so stupid?" Sarah whispered, her voice bitter with self-recrimination. Mike said nothing, his eyes fixed on the tree-line. They both knew there was no good answer to that question. 3 days. It felt like an eternity to Sarah and Mike as they stumbled through the wilderness, evading search parties and struggling to survive. The affair that had once seemed so exciting now lay in tatters, destroyed by the harsh reality of their situation. "This is all your fault," Sarah spat, her once perfect hair matted with leaves and dirt. "If you hadn't been so careless with your finances." "My fault," Mike shot back. "You're the one who couldn't keep your story straight." Jake must have suspected something for months. Their bitter argument was cut short by the distant sound of helicopter blades. They froze, exchanging a look of pure terror before scrambling for better cover. Meanwhile, back in Detroit, Jake was being hailed as a hero. His discovery of the construction site theft ring had impressed everyone from his co-workers to the police. "Jake, my office," Tom called out one morning. Jake entered, his face a careful mask of humility. "What's up, Tom?" The foreman grinned, holding out his hand. "Congratulations, Site Supervisor Buford. You've more than earned this." As Jake shook Tom's hand, accepting the promotion he'd long desired, he felt a twinge of something, not quite regret, but a sense of the enormity of what he'd done. He pushed it aside. This was what he'd wanted, wasn't it? That night, Jake made one final move. Using another burner phone, he called in one last anonymous tip. "I saw 2 people matching the fugitive's description," he reported, his voice disguised. They were heading towards the old mine shaft off County Road 22. The police and rescue teams converged on the abandoned mine, believing they had Sarah and Mike cornered at last. Deep in the mine's twisting tunnels, Sarah and Mike heard the approaching sirens. The realization that they were trapped hit them like a physical blow. "There has to be another way out," Mike said desperately, pushing deeper into the darkness. Sarah hesitated, fear and exhaustion warring within her. "Mike, wait!" But it was too late. Mike's frantic scramble triggered a cascade of loose rock. Sarah screamed as the tunnel mouth collapsed, debris raining down around them. When the dust settled, Sarah found herself pinned beneath a fallen beam, pain shooting through her leg. Mike was nowhere to be seen. The rescue team found her quickly, drawn by her cries for help. As they worked to free her, Sarah's mind raced. How had it all gone so wrong? Hours later, Sarah lay in a hospital bed, an IV drip in her arm, treating her for dehydration and minor injuries. Detective Carter stood at the foot of the bed, her expression stern. "Mrs. Buford, I need you to tell me exactly what happened," Carter said. Sarah closed her eyes, the weight of her actions crashing down upon her. Slowly, haltingly, she began to confess everything. Jake arrived at the hospital, playing the part of the concerned husband perfectly. But as he approached Sarah's room, he heard her voice, thick with tears, spilling every secret. He stepped back, unseen, a complex mix of emotions swirling within him. It was done. Over. He'd won, hadn't he? The following weeks passed in a blur. Sarah, granted immunity for her testimony, watched as her life fell apart. Friends and family turned their backs on her, disgusted by her betrayal. Jake filed for divorce, citing infidelity. The proceedings were quick, given Sarah's public admission of guilt. Mike's trial became a media sensation. Jake sat in the courtroom, watching as his brother's long history of fraud and the elaborate construction site, theft ring, were laid bare for all to see. 6 months later, Jake stood outside the courthouse, watching as Mike was led away to begin his 15-year sentence. He felt empty. The revenge he'd so meticulously planned had left him hollow. As he turned to leave, he found himself face to face with Detective Carter. "Mr. Buford," she said, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Those anonymous tips were awfully convenient, weren't they?" Jake met her gaze steadily. "I suppose the tipster was just observant. Lucky for everyone involved." Carter studied his face, searching for any sign of deception. "Lucky indeed," she said finally. "Take care, Mr. Buford." As Jake walked away, he could feel the weight of Carter's suspicions on his back. But he'd covered his tracks well. There was nothing to connect him to the elaborate scheme he'd orchestrated. He'd achieved his revenge without legal consequences. But as Jake stepped into his new apartment, he realized the cost had been higher than he'd ever imagined. His marriage, his brother, and perhaps a part of himself, all sacrificed on the altar of vengeance. Jake looked at himself in the mirror, site supervisor badge glinting on his chest. He was determined to rebuild his life, to make something of this second chance. But as he stared at his reflection, he knew he'd been forever changed by the choices he'd made. The man who looked back at him was a stranger, harder, colder, and carrying the weight of secrets that would never see the light of day. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comment section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.